to have you here today. Welcome, Oliver. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome, Bill. It's a pleasure to be with you all, and it's an honor to be with the students of Elon. Great school.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to just reiterate what Dr. Deb said. If you have questions for Oliver, use the Q&A icon tab rather than the chat function. Use the Q&A tab, and we'll get to as many questions as we can after we conclude our conversation part of the program. So just to jump right in, Oliver, you know, it's been a few years since you played quarterback at West Virginia, just a couple. And you've had three kids who recently played college athletics. How have things changed since you were an athlete? You know, were their experiences similar in some ways, different in others? How have you seen things evolve over the decades?
Not to date myself, but my freshman year in Morgantown, West Virginia was in 1978. And that's 40 plus years ago. And as I think back and reflect on my experience as a college football player, it was a great experience. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Like most college athletes, I would absolutely do it again if I had the opportunity. But as I looked at my three of my kids' experiences, a couple of things have stood out. One, all the sort of surrounding support systems are better, whether that's, better food, better nutrition, better strength and conditioning, better medical care, better coaching, more science involved. All of that has improved. And of the three kids I had that played college athletics, three different sports: football, women's volleyball, and men's soccer. So I think all the support systems have gotten better. I think the support that the athletes have academically has gotten better, and schools have taken it much more seriously. But the point that I wanted to make is really this. What is so fascinating to me is how what I would call the balance of power has shifted from the 1970s up until, let's say, today, 2020, 2021. And the balance of power in the sense of the relationship that exists between a coach and a student athlete. In today's world, the portal is open for business, right? The one-time transfer rule that was just approved by the NCAA, that gives more power, more leverage to the student athlete. The full cost of attendance, and that varies, of course, as we know, from school to school, but the full cost of attendance is effectively a cash stipend. That certainly wasn't around, back in the 70s or 80s or at all in the past century. So I think there's just a lot of sort of changes in the dynamic, right? The power dynamic that exists between a student athlete and coaches. Clearly, it's an empowerment of the student athlete. And once the NIL universe, the name, image, likeness universe kicks in, and student athletes are allowed to have representatives, agents, brand reps, whatever you want to call it, marketing reps, I think that balance of power will shift even more in favor of the student athlete. So I think over the last 15, 20 years, what you've seen is just a major shift in the empowerment of the student athlete vis-a-vis his or her coach. And I think that's an important thing to sort of consider. And I think that shift is going to continue to happen over the next 10 or 15 years. That to me is the single biggest change. Having said all of that, I think the experience, quite honestly, in many respects is the same. It's time consuming, it's hard, doing your academic work. If you take academics seriously, which most college athletes, of course, do, doing your athletic work, having some semblance of a social life, that's all very time consuming and challenging. And that certainly hasn't changed, I think, from the 70s or even going back further than that.
As you were going through that, I mean, you've had the perspective of being a student athlete, being an athletic director, being part of the NCAA leadership team. And a lot of people don't, focus often on the size of the ecosystem. I mean, college athletics is nearly 500,000 student athletes participating, Division I, Division II, Division III every year. And of course that, high profile Division I football often gets the lion's share of attention, but it's an enormous ecosystem that the NCAA has very effectively nurtured, managed, organized over all these years. And yet the organization seems to be so often a lightning rod for criticism. How would you kind of explain that dichotomy of the sort of very, very well-established, well-managed, broad ecosystem, and yet the kind of criticism that often is directed at the NCAA?
It's a very fair question. It is a massive ecosystem. I think there's something like 1,200 schools that are members in the three divisions, 1, 2, and 3, and even within those divisions, certainly in Division 1, there are sort of different categories of schools. Some sports are common, like men's and women's basketball. Other sports are relatively rare. I think I read with somebody dropping men's gymnastics, maybe it was the University of Iowa, the men's gymnastics teams are down to a dozen or so. But it's a massive system, lots of coaches, lots of student athletes, lots of other players, faculty, reps, these athletic departments with all their staffers, compliance folks, academic support help. So it's a big ecosystem, and the bigger it is and the more unaligned things get in terms of the various constituencies, I think the harder it is to manage. And in many senses, it's like the US Congress, right? They can only respond typically to crises. And I think that's true of the NCAA. The system, as it's designed, the governance system of working, a piece of legislation working its way through the various committees and making it up to the Division I Council and the Board of Directors, that takes time. And in higher ed, I think we can say that folks are relatively risk averse, so that carries over to the NCAA because the association is really a product of its members. So I think that the system, in a sense, is somewhat designed to sort of slow things down, to maintain all these traditions that have been built up over the last 150 years or so of intercollegiate competition. And it's a challenging environment in which to sort of stake out reform and progress, because you may think you can do that as a leader, but look behind you and my gosh, nobody is following, and then you're out there on your own. So I think much like our system of government in the United States, it's big, it's cumbersome, it's designed to sort of move slowly. And as we look at it, I think that it's sort of obvious that that's been a challenge for the NCAA. And as a result, there has been a lot of criticism for the association not being able to do as quickly as one would like. People always compare Mark Emmert, president of the NCAA, who I saw the other day was extended his contract with the association, but they always would compare Mark to the NFL commissioner, Roger Goodell, or the NBA commissioner, Adam Silver. It's a fundamentally different position with different constituencies. And as a result, I think you've got a lot of conflicting interests, competing interests that sometimes take a while to get sort of massaged out and compromised. And as a result, I think you see the association almost always responding as opposed to being out in front of any particular movement.
But it's a great point about the diversity, variety within the college ecosystem. I mean, overseeing, Division III athletics and, kind of Division I Power 5 football. I mean, that's not the same as the NBA or the NFL, which is really one very specific kind of organized league. And, the Knight Commission recently was focused on the fact that the economics of, Power 5 football in particular seem to have become so extreme in a sense, and, skewing economically the overall college financial picture, even to the point where they recommended a separate governance approach for Power 5 or FBS football. What do you think of that? Do you think that there needs to be some fundamental restructuring, or it can be worked out within the existing current framework?
That's one of the big questions that's out there. The Knight Commission did a pretty in-depth study, as they're wont to do, in terms of Power 5 football and sort of how it's separating itself from FCS football and certainly Division II and Division III. And the idea was that because schools are so reliant on revenue from the football programs, If you take a typical Power Five school, most consultants would say the television contract that that conference would have with, ESPN or Fox or CBS, any of the big broadcasters, is sort of 80-20, 80% dedicated to the football value and 20% to the basketball value. And so it's clear that a school like my alma mater, West Virginia, very dependent upon football, upon ticket sales and the success of the program, et cetera, and being in a Power Five conference, that reliance, would lead folks to believe, hey, maybe there is a better way to manage Division I FBS football and to allow FBS football to do perhaps certain things that wouldn't be able to be done in men's soccer or women's softball or whatever the other sport would be. That runs the risk of sort of blowing apart the solidarity that exists on a campus. I remember when my son Andrew was playing football at Stanford, they had something like 36 sports back then. And I think there was a realization from all the football players that, they were generating revenue, but they were, very happy to sort of share that revenue to support the women's field hockey team or the swim team or the wrestling team or any of the Olympic sports that, don't generate enough revenue to cover their own costs. That was part of the solidarity of being a student on campus and, all cheering for the Block S. That solidarity maybe, is showing some fissures or some cracks. So I'm not sure that the NCAA and college football, college athletics writ large is prepared for a different governing body for FBS football, but it's certainly an interesting concept to explore. And I give credit to the Knight Commission for taking a stance and saying, listen, this is something that we need to really look at because you also, you want to protect football and Power Five football because it is a big revenue generator. And without Power Five football revenue and so-called profit from that revenue, it might be very difficult to support a lot of the other sports. It's a tricky question, and there's lots of sort of hair that could hang off of the answer to that question. But I do commend the Knight Commission for raising that issue and forcing administrators, athletic directors, presidents to really have serious discussions about that.
Well, and you touch on a problem that many people have raised concerns about within college athletics, which is maintaining, the multi-sport programs at schools. And I think you also mentioned that Iowa had cut gymnastics recently. I mean, in the wake of the pandemic, I think we saw many schools cutting sports programs. Is this something that was a little bit of an aberration because of the pressure brought by COVID economics, or do you think this is a long-term problem that needs to be addressed?
Well, I think it's both a short-term and a long-term problem. We saw the same thing happen in 2008, 2009, coming out of the recession and the real estate crash, that a number of schools were short on revenue. Perhaps their endowments weren't covering, the type of returns that they would need. And so, there were a number of sports that were dropped. Off the top of my head, I think it was somewhere in the 200 or 300 number of sports. Of course, there's always sports that are being added at various schools that don't seem to get the type of publicity that dropping sports does. But the fact of the matter is that every athletic director, no matter what his or her situation, is in a position where you have to be fiscally responsible. And, we've seen a number of institutions, both big and small, reduce the number of sports that they're sponsoring. That's a hit to the idea of broad-based participation, which is really, I think, at the sort of cornerstone of college athletics. Tennis, in a sense, is no better or worse than football, and softball is no better or worse than baseball. They're all great sports. They all have their their coaches and their players that have their passions, and so let's not make value judgments outside of the fact that we do know we have a track record of what sports generate revenue to pay for all of this. So I do think that there is financial pressures. There's always been financial pressures, and they'll continue to exist. And I worry, someone who enjoys all the sports, I worry that you'll begin to see, even at the bigger schools, some trimming back of some of the sports. Now, that may or may not be necessarily a bad thing. A lot of athletic directors do think, though, as they look at the sports that they sponsor, they say, I always need to think about shoring up my football program or my men's basketball program, because they typically are the two programs that do generate substantial revenue, and they don't want to fall behind their peers. And they look at the budget of the field hockey team or the wrestling team or one of the Olympic sports, and say I could save $1 million here or 500,000 there. Sometimes that's not the accurate sort of analysis, because a lot of those sports have kids who are on 10%, 20% scholarships, and they're actually paying tuition to attend the university. So it's much more nuanced than people would like to think. But I'll tell you this: if I were in charge of the U.S. Olympic Committee, the Paralympic Committee, because so many of our Olympians are trained and sort of nurtured at the collegiate level, I would have real concern as I saw Iowa, for example, drop men's gymnastics, or some of the other Olympic sports, are being dropped at really top-notch institutions, Power 5 institutions. And I guarantee you, without some sort of redress, that's going to have a negative impact on our national teams. That may not be the role of college sports, but that's certainly been something that will be impacted if we continue to see this trend.
Speaking of the revenue point, it looks like we're heading toward an opportunity for student athletes to earn money from use of their name, image, likeness, whether it's giving lessons or social media influencing or endorsements or signing autographs and other opportunities. We have a panel coming up that's going to get into that in real depth, but curious what your thoughts are about this development. Is this a positive change, a negative change? How do you see it affecting college sports?
Well, I think certainly for student athletes, it's a positive change. One could make the argument that when you sign a grant and aid, when you sign your scholarship document, that you don't give up your name, your image, and your likeness completely, right? That you agree to play in a team and wear the team's colors and wear the uniform, et cetera, those things that are obvious. But in your free time, certainly you still retain and should retain as a fundamental right your name, your image, and your likeness. So it's been bandied about for many, many years, going back, even before the Ed O'Bannon case that, of course, made it up to the Supreme Court. So I think it's a good thing for student athletes. I think that there are reasonable guardrails that should be put into place so that student athletes, have some limitations on what they can do. I, as a parent of former student athletes, but also as a former athletic director, worry about the balance of time. One of the hardest things, and as we talked about, being a college athlete, is sort of managing all the responsibilities you have. And if all of a sudden, in addition to your athletics and your academics and your social life, all of a sudden you have an opportunity to generate revenue, whether it's on social media or signing autographs at the local bank, that takes time and could easily distract from your academics, God forbid, or from your athletics. So I think some guardrails are reasonable. It's a big question mark, and you and I, Bill, have talked about this, many, many times. It's a big question mark how this new marketplace will roll out. There's all sorts of consternation about, the various state laws, and will the federal government pass any sort of a bill? Many have been introduced. None have really made it even to, a committee hearing. So I think that it's going to be confusing. One of the big questions really is, will there only be sort of money for the big recognized stars with high profiles, be they the woman from UCLA who had a perfect 10 in a gymnastics meet, or somebody like Trevor Lawrence that's on every sports website today. So, or will this kind of go much deeper, and will the second string tackle at for the Phoenix be able to generate some revenue because maybe he's an avid fisherman and understands some of the great fishing spots in central North Carolina? We just don't know, because it really is a brand new marketplace. It'll be fascinating to watch. It'll be fascinating to see how the athletic administrators respond. It's entirely possible that that the local car dealer that normally would spend $100,000 to be the official sponsor of the Elon Phoenix, they may only do $75,000 and hold back a little bit of money in reserve, because they would like to work with one of the student athletes or a handful of student athletes on some sort of social media promotion. So I think it's fascinating, not just as a sports follower, but really as somebody who's interested in business and economics and how this marketplace, ideally on July 1st, that's the date that the Florida law goes into effect. And unless something significant happens, this market will kick off, and we'll begin to see how it rolls out and the effects that it has on student athletes, which I think will be by and large positive, but also on the institutions themselves.
Speaking of new markets and change, another big change for the sports industry broadly in America is the legalization of sports betting. Since the Supreme Court struck down PASPA, we now see state after state beginning to create regulated sports betting environments within their state. I think we're now up to about half the states that have gotten there. How do you feel that the college sports environment should look at this development, and how should schools, conferences, the NCAA deal with what is clearly coming?
I think that the collegiate environment needs to take a very, hard look, a very sort of clear-eyed look at the sports wagering landscape and what can happen. LeBron James is not going to be bribed to throw a game, right? He already makes plenty of money. You could give LeBron a new Lamborghini and, he probably just one of 10 cars in his garage, right? He's effectively, sort of insulated from any wrongdoing. And I think that's true of almost all professional athletes. That's not true of college athletes. And, if it's a Tuesday night game between two Division II schools that normally doesn't sort of generate a lot of interest, that's, I think, the kind of place where, some sort of malfeasance could take place, where a player would be provided, a certain amount of money or some sort of benefit to, kick the ball out of bounds or, at the appropriate moment or miss a free throw or whatever it is. It's happened before, right?
There has been history in that respect.
Yeah, it's not out of the question, and so I think that the technology that a lot of these companies now possess to do what they call providing integrity services is critical, and I think it's important because I think, to be realistic, we all know that individuals who are allowed to go to the sports books or able to go online will in fact wager on the results of college athletic events, probably football and basketball mostly, but I can see baseball in some markets, softball, men's and women's soccer are becoming more and more popular. So, and then you have all the prop bets, right? So, and even the fantasy type stuff, can be sort of damaging, if you will. I remember talking to the quarterback for TCU, and he told me that he had to tell a couple of the guys down the hall from him to stop, sort of betting on him, if you will, in terms of daily fantasy, because they kept seeing him in the hallway and saying, throw some more touchdown passes. You're behind your quota. We need you to, to be a little bit more offensive so we can win our daily fantasy. So that stuff will happen. And I think you have to sort of acknowledge that, realize that, and take the necessary precautions. And thankfully, because of technology and data and companies like Genius Sports or Sport Radar, there are these integrity services that they should at least offer some protection against games being thrown, which I think is sort of the worst crime one can imagine in the world of sport.
Some states have even, I think at the behest of local schools or conferences, carved out and prohibited betting on schools that are playing within their state from legalizing broadly. I mean, are those kinds of carve-outs or prohibitions logical? Or do you think that it's all eventually going to be one market and you really can't try to stop it? It's best to do as you're saying, which is to be smart about how it ends up rolling out.
I suppose if only sports wagering was taking place in a state in authorized venues, let's say in the sports books, then it's fine, to take out that match of the local college team or the in-state college team. But that's where a lot of the interest would be generated, and I think we can all probably say with a certain degree of certainty that there are still bookies right down at the corner or at the local bar or wherever taking bets, even in states where sports gambling has been legalized. So I think you have to deal with reality and not sort of take the ostrich approach and sort of put your head in the sand and hope that things don't go bad. I just think that given the volume and the interest that we have, the volume of gambling, the interest that people have in sports, the popularity of college athletics, that we should be very clear-eyed and very realistic about the situation and what is happening. And the best way to do that, I believe, is with these integrity services, because they really do work. We've seen that in European football, where they're much further ahead in terms of allowing gambling to take place. In fact, they have the sports books right in the stadium, or European basketball, volleyball, some of the more popular sports in Europe. I think they've proven that not all, but a good bit of the corruption can be sort of weaned out of that game by using the integrity technology.
It makes me think that athletic directors have just a mountain of issues on their plate these days. I mean, you were an athletic director at West Virginia University not that long ago. What are the biggest challenges facing athletic directors and their staffs, their teams at both the large Division I universities and the Division II and Division III colleges as well?
Well, I'll contrast sort of the role of an AD at let's say a big school, Power 5 school, with the president of a professional sports team. So I've worked on the professional side, as you know, and typically in pro sports, there's really only two questions that the president would be asked by his owner or her owner. And they would be, number one, why aren't we winning more games? And number two, why aren't we making more money, right? And it's very focused. Those are the only two things that matter. And you can sort of set up your work day, your work week, your work year based on trying to solve those two issues. Let's win more games and let's make more money. On the college side, there are so many different constituencies that all have different interests. So you've got obviously your university administration, your president, your board of regents or board of governors, whatever you would call it. You've got obviously the academic staff on campus, the faculty and the faculty senate that may or may not have a good relationship with athletics. You have the students themselves, and that's the group that most ADs really do try to serve, to give them the best experience possible. You've got financial considerations, obviously. You've got political considerations. When I was the AD at West Virginia, I had the governor calling me, asking me to schedule a certain team. And you don't really face that very often, but you have sort of political considerations, certainly at the big state flagship universities. You've got parents. Just because a kid goes off to college to play football, basketball, whatever sport it is, that doesn't mean the parents aren't still very much involved, almost like high school. So my phone would often ring and I'd have the parent of a student athlete asking about this or that. Why isn't the coach playing my son or daughter? He or she needs more playing time. Your coach is awful. You should get rid of him. That sort of thing. You have the coaches, obviously, and the staff. So there's just more, I think, constituencies that end up taking more time, and as a result of that, you have ADs that are sort of pulled in a variety of different direction. Most athletic programs are also heavily reliant on fundraising, and at West Virginia, flagship school of a relatively poor state, even there we would be generating 25, 26, 28, sometimes $30 million a year in contributions, and that's a critical number, obviously, for an athletic department. So, to keep all those donors happy with your progress is important as well. So, I think there's just a multitude of challenges in college athletics. Quite honestly, that makes it much more, I think, intellectually stimulating than running a professional team, where again you only have two things to worry about: revenue and wins.
Oliver, if I could, I'm going to pop in here, and I have a couple of questions from our attendees, if you you don't mind answering a few. So how can you comment on the Overtime Elite organization as a new sports league offering talented young basketball players a new pathway to becoming a professional athlete? What would you potentially do? What would that, potentially do to the NCAA basketball and recruiting for top basketball schools? And that is from Laura Cranston.
Sure. Thanks for the question, Laura. It's a very good one. Historically, the path to the professional sports, went through college. It used to be 3 or 4 years, and then it became fashionable if you're good enough to just do 1 year of college basketball. And those restrictions, weren't based on the NCAA. Those were based on the collective bargaining agreements that the NFL has with its players, or the NBA, or some of the other major sports. So what we're seeing now is, particularly in basketball, almost exclusively in basketball, men's basketball, is the opportunity for kids to come straight out of high school, or even while they're in high school, make legitimate money, right? Good money playing in one of the sort of startup leagues. I think it's a good thing. I think that having a variety of opportunities is a positive thing for most young men and young women, for that matter. Although I think on the women's side, it's still the WNBA collective bargaining requirement is for 4 years of college before they're eligible for the WNBA draft. So, we're seeing on the men's side, young men go over to Europe for a year, or play in Australia, play in the G League. Now you have the Overtime League. I hope that kids don't do it just for the money, that they realize, there is an academic component that is important, whether you want to finish high school and get your high school degree, or even do a year or two in college. But listen, this is a nation of opportunity. And if the folks that are running these startup leagues are able to generate enough revenue and have a broadcast package, and if kids realize, oh, this is my best path to get to the NBA, which is where obviously every great basketball player wants to end up as early as possible, then I think it's a good thing, and we'll have to see how it develops.
Thank you for that. We have a question from Will Goldie. Do you see Power 5 football teams breaking off into their own governance and operating without the NCAA? That might be loaded, but that's a good question.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And we talked about that a little bit. That's effectively the Knight Commission recommendation, that all the other sports at the Power 5 level stay with the NCAA and with, as is, but football breaks off and is managed differently. That's already happened with the college football playoff. The college football playoff, the 2 semifinal games and the final, has nothing to do with the NCAA. That's a separate entity, an LLC that distributes its money from ESPN and from ticket sales, et cetera. It distributes that money to the Power 5 schools and to the FBS schools as well. So I don't think that's imminent. But as I had said earlier, I think it's something that schools will talk about and make that determination. The challenge is if you allow if you allow Power 5 football to break off and have their own governing body, the next knocking on the door is going to be from women's basketball or men's basketball or baseball or softball, both sports that, are becoming increasingly popular at the collegiate level. How come them and why not us? And there's all sorts of Title IX implications as well, which we'd need another, 2 hours, to delve into. But I don't think it's imminent, but I do think it's something that has been proposed by a very responsible and respected group, the Knight Commission. So folks will think about it and dig in and sort of set up their opinions on that issue.
Thank you, Oliver. We also have a question here, and Tony Weaver would love to hear your opinion of the transfer portal.
Yeah, the transfer portal to me is fascinating. It's a big headache for basketball and football coaches and others as well. Although historically, lots of the other sports weren't subject to sitting out a year, so a kid could up and leave whenever he or she wanted. Let's say running a track person or a swimmer or whatever. The transfer portal is full of young men who think they might have a better chance somewhere else. It's not clear to me that every one of those kids will, in fact, have a better chance somewhere else. A lot of those kids in the transfer portal who've already said goodbye to their original school may not receive a scholarship offer from any institution, or they may receive it from a school that they really have no interest in. So it's a gamble, it's a risk. But it's, like anything else in life, right? With this new opportunity, right, a one-time transfer comes risk. And if you want to do these things and you've asked for more sort of empowerment and more freedom, then you also have the freedom to all of a sudden find yourself in a terrible spot, right? I'm in the portal. Nobody wants me. And, maybe I overestimated, how good I was, or I overestimated, Coach so-and-so who told me that if I went to the portal, he'd give me some consideration. So, it is a risk. And I think that before you sort of just jump into the portal, it's important, to say to yourself, or the student athlete to say to himself or herself, listen, let me, fight this out one more year. I'll never forget, I was a freshman quarterback at West Virginia, my first year, and I was the backup quarterback. And the quarterback ahead of me was a player from Delaware, and he was a sophomore. He's just 1 year older than me, and he was pretty good. And I remember saying to myself, gosh, maybe I should transfer somewhere because I'm probably not going to beat him out in my sophomore year or my junior year. And who wants to be a backup for 3 years, right? You want to play. Every player wants to play. And I committed myself to beating him out in the spring practice of my freshman year. And I did. He ended up transferring back to his home state of Delaware and played there and had a very nice career. And I, played for 3 years as a starter. So, part of sort of sticking around and competing is learning how to compete. If we sort of drop tail, as they say, at every bit of challenge, then we're not really teaching sort of that resilience and grit and competitiveness that I think college athletics should teach all of the participants.
So I think we're out of time. Is that right, Jana?
Yep, we are coming to a close. So thank you so much, Professor Squadron and Oliver, for kicking off our symposium. That was wonderful. It was a great conversation to launch us into the rest of our panels. So right now we're going to take a short break, about 3 to 5 minutes, and enjoy the video you're about to watch as we launch into our first panel on name, image, and likeness.
Several college basketball players took to Twitter to promote the hashtag #NCAA property on the eve of March Madness.
Some who are playing in the tournament are again pushing for a share of the hundreds of millions of dollars the NCAA will pull in.
Once you start looking at the numbers is where you really notice that you're being exploited.
Hey, Christy, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
All righty, we are going to start our first panel on name, image, and likeness, moderated by Dr. Tony Weaver at Elon University.
Thank you, Dr. Dabbs. As Shannon just mentioned, my name is Tony Weaver. I'm Associate Dean, School of Communications, and a professor in our Sport Management Department. And I'll be moderating our first panel on name, image, and likeness. I'm joined by several experts on this topic, and I'd like to welcome Gabe and Christy to Elon, and certainly welcome back to Shelby, a proud graduate of our program. Before we get started on name, image, and likeness, if I could have our panelists just kind of introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about your experience with the issue that we're talking about, name, image, and likeness. So we'll start with Christy.
Get myself unmuted. Hi, I'm Christy Dosh. I am a sports business contributor with Forbes. I was formerly with ESPN and still do a little bit of radio and TV work with them. I am a former practicing attorney, so I say I'm a recovering attorney, and have covered college sports for the better part of a decade now, and have always been really interested in the finance side of it, and have been following the name, image, and likeness discussions since the very beginning. And I feel like we started talking about this 10 or 12 years ago, and it just now is becoming a reality. So I consult with athletic departments and have been talking to a lot of athletic departments and conferences about how they're going to provide education to student athletes. But also, I've been spending a lot of time educating folks who work inside athletic departments and coaches who are getting questions from student athletes and potential student athletes that they have no idea how to answer, because a lot of this is uncharted territory, especially when it comes to social media marketing. So that's kind of my interest in this space, is how social media marketing is going to play such a big role once NIL is a reality.
Excellent. Thank you, Christy. Welcome. Gabe, let's go to Gabe.
Okay, thanks, Tony, and hi, everybody. It's good to be here virtually. My name is Gabe Feldman. I'm a law professor at Tulane Law School. I'm also the director of the Tulane Sports Law program, and I've been involved with college athletics for a long time. I've been teaching and writing about it for 15 years. Before that, I was a litigator at a firm in Washington, D.C., where I worked on sports litigation. And more recently, I was asked to write a white paper on name, image, and likeness issues for a group called the Knight Commission that you heard Oliver Luck and Bill talking about just in the previous discussion. And I'm still doing work with them on name, image, and likeness. And I'm also helped drafting a name, image, and likeness law for all 50 states with an organization called the Uniform Law Commission. And so those are my sort of national areas with name, image, and likeness. I also help oversee our NCAA compliance office here at Tulane. So I do NIL work and amateurism related work at the institutional level too. And I also teach about NIL. So I've had a lot of NIL over the last several years.
Thank you, Gabe. Welcome to Elon. And finally, Shelby.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. As Dr. Weaver mentioned, I am a proud Elon grad, graduated from the Sport and Event Management program back when that was the title in 2013. I'm currently the Assistant Director of Athletics at Washington State University, overseeing all of our student athlete development programming, which we call the Cougar Pursuit. So that's all of our career, leadership, and personal development. I'm also pursuing my EDD in higher education at George Washington University in DC, with a focus on higher ed and college athletic finances. So a lot of the work around NIL for me kind of started in my doctorate degree, focusing on cost of attendance, looking at how that impacts finances and policies. But now in my work at Washington State has been on a NIL working group that we've had for about a year now, focusing on this education and policy work and how we can support our student athletes and our coaches through this policy change and what more is to come. I also will say that I've been on probably like 100 hours of Zoom webinars and sales pitches around this. So learned a lot over this past year when it came to NIL.
Excellent. Well, thank you everybody for participating in this. Let's get started by, Gabe, maybe if you could give us a brief overview. I know Oliver and Bill were just talking about it briefly, but if you could give our audience just a brief overview of what's the landscape of NIL and what's happening. I know we have some important legislation being presented. The next couple of months are going to be really important to the NCAA. So I think it's probably best that we start with a snapshot of what's going on.
Yeah, and I'll do my best to keep this brief. This is there's a lot going on, but I'll try to summarize it in just about 5 minutes to give sort of some context for the conversation that I think Christy and Shelby and the rest of us will have to follow up. But let me back up a little bit to give the basic context for why this is such a potentially significant development. And the NCAA and college sports in this country are different than really anywhere else in the world. We don't really have a similar model anywhere else. And college sports is based on a notion called amateurism. And amateurism helps, among other things, separate college sports from pro sports. And the basic definition of amateurism, although it's evolved over time, is really that college athletes should not be paid based on their athletic ability. And that early on was taken very literally to prohibit even athletic scholarships. That was loosened to allow athletic scholarships, but still designed to prevent primarily two things. One, to pay the athletes to play, which would make them look like professional athletes. And then two, to pay them for the value in their name, image, and likeness that is generated by the fact that they're athletes. So they can't do endorsement deals, they can't do appearances or get paid for them. And so those have been, broadly speaking, the amateurism rules. And over time, and certainly more recently, there's been momentum to try to modernize these amateurism rules and to allow college athletes to receive compensation for their name, image, and likeness within certain parameters. And there's a lot of reasons, I think, why it's come to this point. There's a lawsuit that was brought by a former UCLA basketball player and an NBA player named Ed O'Bannon that kind of started down this road. And then there's an explosion of social media and NIL opportunities for lots of people there, not just for star athletes or major celebrities. There is idea that this is just unfair from an economics issue, that every other student on campus can monetize their NIL except the athletes. There was a racial equity piece to this, that basketball and football players, at least at the Division I level, are predominantly Black. And so this is disproportionately affecting Black athletes. And lots of other issues came together so that states started taking notice. And in particular, California said that this is unfair, that college athletes are not allowed to make money off of their name, image, and likeness. So they passed the first law that said basically the NCAA, other collegiate sports associations, conferences, and schools cannot prevent college athletes from being paid for their name, image, and likeness by third parties, not by the schools. They don't want the schools to do it, but they want third parties to be able to do it, and that the athletes should be able to be represented by agents to help give them some protection when negotiating with third parties. And that was a very significant development because that's something the NCAA has not permitted for decades. Just to be clear, California's law and all the other laws that followed from the state level, they don't give college athletes this right to make money off their name, image, and likeness. They already have that right under the law. What they do is prevent the NCAA from preventing the athletes from exercising that right. So California went first. Since California, 38 other states have introduced legislation that is very similar that would allow, again, in practice, college athletes to get paid for name, image, and likeness from third parties and be represented by agents. I think we're up to either 10 or 11 states have now passed laws. Florida, New Mexico, and a couple others will take effect July 1, so just a couple of months from now. And only 11 states have not introduced any legislation in this area. So we expect that there could be 20, 30 states that have passed these laws within the next couple of months. And so just to give you some context, that means that 39 states have introduced legislation on NIL in the last 2 years. All the students are too young to remember what I'm about to say, but in the 80s, states were looking to pass seatbelt laws. It wasn't at the time against the law to not wear a seatbelt. And states realized, oh, this is very dangerous for the passengers in the cars. We need to pass these laws quickly. It took about 15 years to get 39 states to introduce seatbelt legislation. 2 years to do NIL legislation. So you can just see how rapidly things are moving. Then at the federal level, Congress has introduced 9 different bills over the last 2.5 years that would address NIL and would also, again, permit college athletes to receive compensation for NIL, among other things. And then if that weren't enough, the Supreme Court is about to decide a case called NCAA versus Alston that addresses that amateurism concept that we talked about from a more basic level, not NIL specific, but will certainly potentially have some impact on NIL. And then there's the NCAA itself. Usually when there are going to be changes to NCAA rules, we watch to see what the schools do and what the divisions do and what happens in their meetings. And the NCAA has drafted legislation, proposed it at Division I, Division II, Division III level, but they've put that on hold while they wait to see how all of these other pieces are playing out. So we've got activity at the state level, the federal level, at the Supreme Court, and at the NCAA level. And we're all waiting to see what's going to happen, how it's going to play out. It's impossible to predict, but we know with almost near certainty that in the next 4, 5, 6 months, college athletes for the first time ever will have the right to be compensated for their name, image, and likeness based on their athletic ability from third parties. So I will stop there. I was close to 5 minutes.
Oh, that was excellent, by the way. So now I guess I have to go to the tough part of this. I have to turn to Shelby and say, okay, Shelby, now how do you take what Gabe just said and how do you help your student athletes modernize? What are college campuses doing about some of the things that Gabe just talked about?
Yeah, it's funny to reflect back to when I started here at WSU about a year and a half ago. I had no idea that this was going to be part of my job in student athlete development. And here I am, like one of the few people in our department who's really focused on it right now. But what I've seen across the Pac-12 and then other institutions is really different across different schools. You'll see back to last summer that schools were starting to announce which programs or software platforms or branding experts that they were partnering with to start this education early. So either it's Influence or Open Doors, we had Jeremy Darlow, all of the buzz was around what is our approach. And month by month, week by week, we're seeing more and more come out and naming them and creating that education plan along the way. So from my perspective, a lot of conversations have happened at WSU and then even in the Pac-12. I sit on a committee of other student athlete development professionals and we meet twice a month. And this conversation comes up at least once a month and every single department is doing something different. Whoever is overseeing it is different at each school, whether it's compliance, marketing, all your external team, social media to student athlete development. So for us, it's a mixture. We've got on our committee, our compliance director, we've got external teams, we've got student athlete development, and then our AD and our deputy ADs there. So a lot of different angles going into this to make sure we're making the right decision to help our student athletes along the way and give them that education. So we brought in a lot of student athletes into the conversation to see where their head's at and understanding what direction this could head. Are they going to focus a lot on that social media influence approach? So what education do we need to bring there? Are they going to focus on that entrepreneurship side of things? We have a handful who have started their own businesses as student athletes and worked through the compliance system that way. And this opens a lot of doors for them in the future. And then what else is out there that we don't know yet? So it's going to be changing every year, but as the more and more that we learn and bring in those experts to teach us what is important here and build that strong curriculum is what we're really focused on. But big picture, we're seeing it different in every school, and as it should be. Every school has different types of student athletes and their approach, so we have to do what's best for our student athletes.
So then building off of just a little bit of that, relying on some experts, I think it's a great time to ask Christy about kind of what are you seeing in the marketplace, and how are student athletes reacting? How are corporations reacting? What do you anticipate will happen?
Yeah, Shelby's right that it's interesting to see how all the different schools are handling it differently, because I've talked to probably, I don't know, 20, 25 schools, and everybody's approaching it different. Like she said, in terms of, is it under compliance? Is it under marketing? I think in the not so distant future, we're going to see a lot of athletic departments hiring people that this is their sole job, is around name, image, and likeness, because I think there's going to be a lot internally for athletic departments to manage, not just with education, but with compliance. And I think it's going to come at everybody really fast in July when this goes into effect. I think there's 4 states right now going into effect in July, and or maybe it's 5, and then I think Georgia will sign any day now, and that'll make another one. So it's coming really fast. And Shelby's right. Like a year and a half ago, athletic departments started sort of thinking about this and how were they going to provide education and what was that going to look like. And that's when I started hearing from schools and conferences. And I was really interested to hear the ones that had polled their student athletes, the types of opportunities they were most interested in. There was the obvious stuff like sports camps and private lessons and that kind of thing, which they haven't been able to profit off of in the past. And you hear a lot about autograph signings or selling, game used gear or doing appearances at the local car dealership. And then that led to a lot of conversations about how this was only going to benefit the top football players and men's basketball players, which I think is patently untrue, because I've been talking to social media marketing firms for over a year now. I've written probably a half dozen pieces where I've interviewed various social media marketers about not only how student athletes could get ready, but how brands are getting ready for this. And in fact, I'll let you guys in on a little secret. I'm working on a piece right now for Forbes that'll probably come out one day next week, where I talk to social media marketing firms about all the brands they have that right now already have campaigns put together. They've identified the exact student athletes they want to work with, and they're basically just waiting for someone to, fire off the pistol and tell them go. So it's going to come fast when it becomes a reality, because brands are salivating over the idea of working with student athletes. A lot of them already work with influencers who are in that same age group. And in fact, a lot of them referred me to clients who were professional surfers or skateboarders, were in these non-NCAA sports and are already acting as influencers and making a lot of money from social media marketing in addition to other revenue streams. And so brands have been wanting to work with student athletes because they want to be in that demographic. And it's not just male student athletes. There's a huge amount of opportunities for female student athletes, because on platforms like Instagram and Pinterest, those are primarily female-driven platforms, and a lot of the spending power in the United States is driven by women. And so I get really frustrated when I see news reports about how, this is going to benefit the male student athletes in those, that handful of sports like football and basketball and maybe baseball, and not everyone else, because I don't think that's true at all. I think we are going to see women have some amazing opportunities. So actually that has been my sort of soapbox, and what I've been working with a lot of schools on is programming specifically for female student athletes and sort of Olympic sports athletes versus focusing on the football and the men's basketball players because they do have better visibility. They are going to get some opportunities that maybe other folks aren't going to, but there's plenty to go around for everyone. And it's been interesting to learn about student athletes that already have platforms that aren't even necessarily related to their sports performance. Like one school told me their female student athlete who has the largest number of followers, she has a YouTube channel where all she does is make smoothie recipes, and she's got like 1 million followers, and brands are going to want to work with her. So I'm excited to see all the different kinds of opportunities that are going to come out of this.
In some of those opportunities, are you seeing them go across divisions? So do you see Division II and Division III student athletes even getting involved in this? Because we do focus on Division I, Power 5. I think when we start to think down a little deeper, we can envision, okay, mid-major Division I. But are we talking Division II and Division III as well, and potentially
Absolutely.
junior college?
Yeah, in fact, I got asked to testify before a committee out in California where the community colleges were actually fighting to be included in that California bill because they weren't initially. And we talked about the opportunities that might be there for, community college athletes. They're definitely there for Division II and III as well, because it's so much more about the personal brand of the individual student athlete. And that brand might be built around something outside of their sports, like the student athlete I mentioned with the smoothie channel. There are a lot of student athletes on campuses of all sizes and divisions right now who have really strong platforms, whether it's blogging or social media or podcasting or gaming. I have learned more than I ever wanted to know about gaming and the opportunities that are going to be there, because that's not my space at all. But I've been on a couple of panels with other folks and learned a lot about that. And there's going to be some cool opportunities there too. So I definitely think that it crosses the divisions. Yes, if you're at a university that's got a strong brand and already gets a lot of media attention and a lot of publicity, maybe there will be bigger opportunities there. But a lot of that, I think, too, is going to depend on whether you're able to use university marks, which has been an interesting discussion, because a lot of the really strong brands, like I went to University of Florida for law school, and I don't live too far from there, so I work with them a lot. That's not the kind of school that's going to be wanting student athletes to use their marks. But I was lucky enough actually to be on the phone with Oliver last week, and we were talking about this, and he said a lot of Division II schools, might want student athletes to use their marks because it might actually help elevate, the university's brand. And I got so caught up in thinking about all the big brand schools that are fighting this that I didn't think about how it might actually benefit schools that don't get a lot of their own publicity. So it'll be interesting to see too how that differs from, division to division.
So Gabe, wearing several hats at Tulane, what kind of advice would you give your student athletes when they come to you to say, what do I do about this? How do I manage all of this?
Well, I'd say it's not just for the athletes themselves, but for the coaches, for the athletic administrators, for people like Shelby and the professors on campus, everybody who has currently some interaction with college athletes is about to be introduced to a world they've never been involved with before. Because up until now, with very limited exception, agents and third parties and these potential endorsement companies have not been allowed to talk to college athletes, or not been allowed to pay them. So there was no real reason for them to interact. And now you're going to have a flood of people coming on campus who are going to be trying to at least get some piece of this new revenue that's going to be generated. And whether that's the marketing agent, or whether that is the platform that Shelby was talking about, or whether those are the third parties that want to deal with the athletes directly. So what I would say to everybody is just be aware of all the different issues that this is going to raise, legally, morally, education-wise, the impact it's going to have on the time demands of the college athletes that are already strapped in terms of time demands, the legal issues that might be raised with IP issues, as Christy said, can you use the school marks or not? I do think a lot of schools, even the D1 schools, would like to allow their athletes to use their marks, because it's a great recruiting tool to be able to say, if you come to Alabama, you get to put the Alabama jersey on during the ad. And that's a lot more valuable, no offense to Alabama State, but than if you go to Alabama State. And I think that's in part why the NCAA and the Knight Commission, among others, have cautioned against allowing schools to be even able to license their marks to college athletes, because it will make it very much like the school is paying the athlete. It will sort of blur the line between paying the athletes to attend the institution versus having the athletes be paid for their name, image, and likeness. So I think there's a lot of issues there, whether an athlete can do a deal with a sponsor that the school currently has, or if it's a Nike school, can the athlete do a deal with Adidas? And what impact will that have on the sponsorship money? What impact, if any, will it have on Title IX? What impact will it have on your taxes, the financial aid you're receiving outside of your athletic aid? I mean, there's a long laundry list. How are you going to vet the agents? How are you going to vet the third parties? Who's going to oversee what they're doing? How are you going to report and monitor what your athletes are doing? So there's a lot. So if we had more than the 45 minutes we had here, I could give you more detail, but that's where I'd start.
Well, and so I'll kind of bring it back to Shelby on campus again. Lots of concerns. Some that Gabe just mentioned. Oliver had mentioned one earlier about just the balance of time. How are student athletes going to manage all of this, the responsibility associated with it. But I think there's an opportunity from an educational point of view that there might be a positive spin to some of this. And I was just curious if you or people that you know or anybody at Washington State, have you looked at the opportunities that could be created from an educational point of view or a teachable moment when it comes to introducing student athletes to name, image, and likeness and giving them a chance to become an entrepreneur, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. We technically put this under our personal development section in our Cougar Pursuit program. So not necessarily under career or leadership, but as we dive into it even more, we recognize that this is just an extension of everything else that we've been teaching them around student athlete development, because it gives them a lot of life skills beyond just benefiting from their name, image, and likeness. So from those issues around time management, we teach that anyways, but now we'll teach it with that mindset of, okay, now you have extra things that you want to do and basically have a job in a different way. So how do you factor that into your schedule beyond just how do you factor in your academic schedule and your homework and then your competition and travel? So that's something that we've already been doing. We'll talk about it a lot differently. To even the entrepreneurship standpoint of, as we see more and more schools or schools who've already had it have had majors or concentrations or certificate programs focused around entrepreneurship, because this generation is that group that wants to start their own businesses, work for themselves, and they're creative and innovative that way. And they have these Shark Tank competitions at universities. So those avenues have already been there on campus. So we can just allow our student athletes to be part of that a lot differently now and grow from that. And then that applies to whatever field they want to go into. So whether it's going into sports or going into business or finance, they get those internship opportunities through this name, image, and likeness that they may not have been able to before with those structured internships. They're getting those business skills, they're getting that budgeting skill, they're getting the time management and problem solving skills that they never had before. And they're doing it in a fun and creative way. So they may not want to go to our resume workshop and be bored out of their mind letting us talk to them. But then we can sit down with them and say, you just started this business, how do you talk about it? And then you can put that on your resume if you're wanting to apply for a job. So it's really transferable in so many different ways. And if they want to be involved, they will be involved. And as they see their peers are involved and they get this unique opportunity, it's just even more ways for us to better prepare student athletes for life after sport.
So I know, Christy, you're in this space, but I'll certainly open up to the entire panel. What should we be concerned about? It appears as though we're headed this way, and it appears as though we're all preparing for this to happen in some way, shape, or form. But obviously, this raises so many other concerns. What should we be thinking about now in order to make this a healthy part of college athletics?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things. And I started about a week ago screenshotting some stuff from a few groups that I'm in. I have enough followers on Twitter to be considered an influencer. I would never call myself that, but I get offers from brands on Twitter and on Instagram. So I know what it's like to be on the receiving end and what some of those look like. And, I'm in my late 30s. I have a law degree. I do own my own business. I consider myself to be relatively smart, and I get really caught up in some of them. And it sounds too good to be true, and I know it does, and I still have to like stop and knock some sense into myself, or ask a friend, like, does something about this read a little fishy to you too? And then forget about when you start getting into looking at any kind of contract you might have with a brand. But the scary thing is that most of these brands that reach out to folks for social media, they aren't going to have a contract. You're probably not going to have an agent, because they're going to be reaching out to people who might have, 2,500 followers on Instagram or 5,000. It's not going to be a deal that's going to generate enough money for an agent to be interested in representing a student athlete. And so I think there's going to be a lot of deals happening where student athletes have to make these decisions on their own. I think they're going to seek out counsel from each other. Maybe they'll ask their coach, maybe they'll ask somebody else in the athletic department in marketing or compliance, or just someone that they have a good relationship with. And so a lot of the athletic departments I've talked to have been trying to figure out, like, where's that line? Like, where do we feel comfortable weighing in and giving advice? And where are we going too far and maybe opening ourselves up to some sort of liability for the guidance that we're giving here? And so I know a lot of people are trying to decide exactly how they're going to manage that. And I started screenshotting in these groups that I'm in where influencers post offers that they got and like ask for feedback or ask, does this sound fishy? Or has anybody ever dealt with this brand? And I thought I would just have like a few examples I could stick in a blog post. And I've only been doing it for about a week, and I have like 120 examples. So I'm still not sure what I'm going to do with them. Some of them have some recurring themes in them. And student athletes may have already been getting some of these, because some of it is just you reach a certain follower or engagement threshold, especially on Instagram, and these brands just start reaching out to you. A lot of them just want to send you free product, which can be cool. I mean, I think there's a lot of female student athletes that'll get offers from boutiques just to, get sent free clothes and to put up posts wearing those clothes. And so I think there's a lot of education to do around not getting taken advantage of, not working with a brand that maybe you don't align with. And I always give the example of sort of the biggest pitfall, one of the bigger ones I've seen. I shamelessly watched The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, and there was a contestant on The Bachelor maybe 2 years ago, a year ago, I can't remember, but she had done a modeling shoot. And the images were used on the company's website and social media. I think it might have even been on a billboard. And there ended up being Confederate flags in the image. And she came out and said that when she shot those photos, there were no Confederate flags on set. She had no idea that the brand was going to use that sort of imagery, that was all put in post-production. And then she was the one, because she was the more visible person, because she's on this reality show, she's the one who was getting all the public outcry about it and was getting, hate mail from people and was all over all these tabloids. And, I think that there are going to be situations like that where student athletes are going to be aligned with brands and not realize maybe how that brand is going to use their image. So I think there's a lot of education that has to happen around good and bad deals and things to look out for, and contract clauses you need to have, and why you need a contract in the first place. And like I said, it's going to come fast.
Just listening to the three of you discuss this, I just can't help but worry about student athlete well-being and what that might mean for the stress levels of all of our student athletes, but certainly ones that get caught up in the opportunities that could exist. We have one more minute.
Hop in.
Yeah, please do, Shannon.
We've got some really good questions firing off from our engaging attendees with this excellent panel. So first question from Lauren Belk. So some obstacles for the NIL deal are taking away amateurism of college athletics and athletes having sponsors that are competitors of their college teams or their college brand sponsors. How do you think these issues may be addressed or avoided? And I will Gabe, why don't you take that one to start out with and then piggyback off?
Sure. So it's a great question. And it's a question that the state legislators are thinking about, the federal legislators are thinking about, the NCAA is thinking about, people in schools. I'm sure Shelby has had discussions about this, because I think there are multiple things happening at the same time. There's a recognition that we want to give college athletes more rights, more economic rights, and also recognition that whatever criticism you might have of the NCAA or college athletics, we want to maintain college sports, and that includes not only football and basketball, but broad-based opportunities that schools offer. And we recognize that there is some subsidization of what we call the non-revenue, the Olympic sports on campus. So we want to make sure that revenue isn't being taken away from the overall student body in a way that harms athletic opportunity. So how do you balance all those things? And I think that sort of comes to a head with the conflicting sponsorship question. If it may be that if the college athlete gets a deal with Pepsi and the school has a deal with Coke, is that going to hurt the school's revenue? And I think there are multiple ways that it's being dealt with. One is it's up to the school to decide if they want to allow conflicting sponsors or not. Another is that the schools can prevent conflicting deals from happening while the athlete is engaged in official team activities. So they couldn't take the bottle of Coke and bring it into the podium after the game if their school has a deal with the competing sponsor. There are others that say you can only prevent deals with companies that are immoral or reflect poorly on the institution or potentially the athlete. And then there are some that are sort of in between that. So there's lots of different ways to do it. And I don't think there's a one right or wrong way to do it. I think it just depends on sort of how you want to balance it. And it may be that the best way to do it is to let schools handle it. And then if the school really is worried about the conflicting sponsor, they can prevent it. If another school says, we're not worried about it, they can allow it. And then athletes can decide where they want to go, hopefully not based on the NIL opportunities, but there'll at least be some transparency up front. But it's a challenging issue. And the Knight Commission is certainly concerned about that. And in their principles in NIL don't have a restriction on conflicting sponsors, but certainly recognize the concerns that it raises. And I think athletic directors certainly are aware of it as well.
Thank you so much. Shelby, I've got a question here from Serena Archer. How do you think this might affect the recruiting process and the conversations that college coaches are having with potential student athletes?
That's a great question. And I think we're learning about that more and more each day. I think it comes down to what's important to those prospective student athletes. I've seen where coaches will be like, can you talk about what we're doing for name, image, and likeness in the future? Because this athlete has X number of followers. And we want to help support them and show how we will. So it's important in recruiting conversation to talk about that and have that prepared. So they're starting to see it more and more while recruiting and introducing that idea of name, image, and likeness education the same way they do with career, leadership, and personal development. So it just added on to what we are currently doing. And it's also added on to, let's talk about academics. So we're just part of that recruiting process even more in student athlete development. But then I think the next step is identifying and even learning from these prospective student athletes. What are they looking for and what are they seeing from their experience in high school, and what education do they need in high school too to prepare them for this transition to college?
Thank you so much. Yeah, as a former college softball coach, I think this is a very interesting conversation for coaching staffs and really how can you promote the institution and make sure that you're doing what you say you're there to do without compromising some integrity there. So we got another question here. Laura Cranston said, so if Gabe is successful in uniform legislation across 50 states, so that's right, Gabe, you are going to pass this entire legislation. Will that then usurp the 4 to 5 states that have not passed it, or maybe that meant have passed it? Do you think that it would change those states that are maybe not in agreement? So anyone can jump in on that question from Laura.
Great question. I will say, so I'm working with an organization called the Uniform Law Commission that has representatives from all 50 states. And so the idea is that they identify areas of the law that can benefit from uniformity. And they've identified name, image, and likeness as one of those areas, and are now working with representatives from these states to come up with the substance of the law. And then the goal is to have all 50 states adopt it. So it would, in essence, supersede the laws that have been passed, that haven't taken effect. They're fairly similar, but that is the idea, because the fear is if you have one set of rules in Florida, a different set of rules in California, another in North Carolina, that it's difficult for the NCAA to, one, enforce those rules and to have fair competition, because the NCAA, like most sports organizations, relies on what they call competitive balance, and this idea that all teams are playing on a relatively level playing field, Freudian slip there. But although there are differences in colleges, they don't want this to be a difference. They don't want it to be that if you go to school in Florida, you can make more money than if you go to school in California or a state that hasn't passed NIL. So this is a way to say to all the states, you don't have to rush to pass these laws or try to one up your neighbor. You're all going to have the same law, which is what Congress could do too. Rather than going state by state, Congress could pass a law that would preempt the states and say, here's the federal NIL rule. States, you don't get to rule on this at all.
Thank you so much. And Katie Naughton has a question here. And Christy, I'm going to let you tackle this one. College athletics is known to be a place of corruption. We could look at the news almost every other day and see something going on. Do you think that there will be more regulations in place, more oversight in place to help with corruption? Or do you think there'll be more corruption maybe between brands and athletes due to NIL?
Yeah, I think it's going to get more complicated because I have coaches that I've talked to already telling me that boosters are getting involved already. And in fact, one coach told me he had a booster running around essentially offering NIL deals to prospective student athletes. And some of them were student athletes the coach wasn't planning to recruit. So there was this tension between the coach and the booster about like who was even going to be recruited to come to this school, and it was for football. And those are the coaches that I've been hearing from so far have been football coaches. And I had the executive director of the AFCA on my podcast, and he talked about this too, and how many coaches have been coming to him talking about now they've sort of got this additional role of trying to control their boosters. Some of them probably already had trouble with that. But now we're sort of almost legalizing what these boosters can do. Now, many of the laws that have come out or been proposed have said, that NIL can't be used as an inducement to get a student athlete to go to a specific school. But I think we all know that that's going to happen. And based on what I'm hearing so far, I think it's going to happen a lot, at least in football. I've really only been hearing from football coaches so far.
If anybody else would like to piggyback off that before we close the panel, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point because there's some thoughts that when you bring this to light and we legalize all this, that a lot of the problems will be solved around compensation for student athletes. But there's so many other issues that come up that are going to make it almost impossible to govern. And so in some ways, I think we should all be worried about Christy's point of corruption becoming a larger problem, and certainly money becoming greater. It opens up the door to the things that were under the radar, so to speak.
I just would want to add a positive note on this is that campuses have already been doing this from a non-student athlete perspective. So if we kind of connect with how our students on campus getting money or making money off of their name, image, and likeness, then it can almost be translated that way. We've seen on our campus with our entrepreneurship center that they will help students like find investors through their entrepreneurship center, or how do they brand the Coug logo on their sunglasses that they made with their company. So it's already happening on campuses and they're way far ahead of us. So from a positive note, we can at least learn from them and avoid some of these corruption issues that may happen.
One other thing I'd add, maybe slightly less positive, but the old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But if it is broken, fix it. And I think a lot of people recognize that a lot of parts of college sports are broken and need to be fixed. And the NCAA does not suffer from a lack of corruption. And if we've seen from the FBI scandal and the fact that there are people who are going to jail for providing compensation or directing athletes to go certain places, it's not as if the system is perfect and allowing NIL is suddenly going to corrupt a perfect system. And it doesn't mean we should corrupt it more, but I think it is time to allow college athletes to receive some of the benefits of this system above board, and that might actually help clean it up. But or at least will give college athletes some of the rights that I think most people think they deserve at this point.
Well, thank you so much, Christy, Gabe, Shelby, and moderator Dr. Weaver, for such incredible insight and thoughtful responses to NIL. I know it is highly complicated and complex, and we have some of the bright minds with us, so thank you for that. At this time, we're going to transition to our next panel, but there will be a short video to introduce Title IX and the gender gap in college athletics. Thank you all again so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Shanna.
So when I think about women in sport, I think about visibility. As a young woman, as a young girl, being able to see other women in sports and seeing them in those roles as athletic directors or commissioners or coaches, it lets them know that those things are possible. Don't be afraid to get your hands dirty, and your talents and your hard work will take you where you want to go.
All right, we are going to begin our second panel on Title IX and the gender gap in college athletics. I want to thank you all for being here with us and our attendees for joining us. Just a reminder, attendees, go ahead and drop your questions into the question and answer for the Zoom function, and we will get to those at the end of the panel. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Carol Lucia. She is the moderator for this panel, and we cannot wait for such an excellent discussion.
All right, great. Thank you all so much. We are excited for panel 2, the unlevel playing field, the gender gap in athletics. It was a pleasure for me to spend time with Debbie, Amy, and Amy earlier last week. And so we were kind of talking about how we were going to do our introduction. So what I'd like to do is have them introduce themselves. They're going to share their current position and then briefly an experience, either personal or professional, in sport where you experienced the unleveled playing field. So Debbie, you want to start off? And yeah, we got to unmute you.
I'm unmuted, I think. Good afternoon to everyone participating. I retired technically 2 years ago, I think tomorrow. And I am Emeritus Athletic Director for NC State University, Board of Trustees member at Elon University, proud Board of Trustees member. I was thinking about this question about discrimination. I'm just going to go all the way back. Most of the people on this call were not participating in athletics when Title IX was passed, but I was. And so in 1972, I was at Elon University on the women's basketball team. And what I remember, which we celebrated, and you will think is funny, and it is quite odd thinking back, we had our first set of warm-ups. And the warm-ups were not new. They came from the wrestling team. So when the wrestling team got new warm-ups, they gave their old warm-ups to the women's basketball team. And the funny part about it, that's not the funny part, funny part is we were thrilled to have them because we had never had warm-ups. So if you've never had something and you get it, it's pretty special to you. And we talk about that even today, those of us who are living in the area who played on that team.
Go ahead, Amy Perko.
Oh, okay. Hi. Thanks again to Elon for organizing this event. I'm Amy Privet-Perko. I'm the CEO of the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics. And just for those who don't know, the commission is an independent group with a legacy of leading transformational change that prioritizes the education, health, safety, and success of college athletes. With regard to sharing an experience of an unlevel playing field, Debbie, I think I'll stay on the clothing kick here. Just one memory that sticks out that, is relatively minor when it comes to the big picture of opportunities that Title IX has presented, but I think it's a good example, as Debbie's was, of how the times were. And it was in high school in the early 80s, several, 8 years or so beyond the passage of Title IX. But our football team was a powerhouse, and they were treated like a powerhouse. Our high school colors were green and white, and all the football team members were given nice green polo shirts to wear on football Friday game days and to wear to the pep rallies. And you always, that fall Friday afternoon, you could smell the steaks cooking on the grill for the football team's pregame meal. But I played high school tennis. We had the same season, and we didn't have uniforms, so we had to supply our own uniforms, either a white skirt or shorts and a green polo shirt. So we had to find our green polo shirt. And looking back on it now, it seems so simple to add 10 polo shirts to the football team pep rally shirt order, right? But that's just not the way folks thought about things then.
Thank you, Amy.
We'll move on. I'll take it here from my fellow Amy. My name is Amy Yacola. I'm the Atlantic Coast Conference Deputy Commissioner, Chief of External Affairs. And I'm really honored and humbled to be a part of this panel today. And it's real special because I obviously know both Debbie and Amy and have had a chance to know them for a number of years, and just really terrific people, and very honored to be a part of this group. I would say, and again, Debbie and Amy gave great examples. I would say I'll keep it a little bit more current in terms of when I started at the conference office. I'll give you one from my college days in the conference office. When I started at the conference office, I remember having a discussion about, sort of the shifting of sports and what sports I was going to manage versus what sports, the other folks on the staff were going to manage. And I was happy to be there. It was wonderful. But I remember someone saying, well, Amy, you'll handle the women's sports. And I remember thinking to myself, well, that's great. I'm happy to do that, but I could certainly handle sports that aren't played by women as well. And it just was, it was a subtle sort of, well, you'll handle those because you're a woman. And again, that just was an interesting perspective. I think the other example I'll give is when I was in college, I was very fortunate that my parents had raised me that I could do anything. And so I knew how to umpire or officiate or play different sports. And I certainly knew how to score a baseball game. I certainly knew how to keep a book. And unfortunately, there was a game where somebody had run into a circumstance where they weren't going to be there. And so I said, well, I'll be glad to keep the book for you. And somebody said, well, you know how to keep a baseball book? And I thought, well, yeah, sure do. And those are very subtle. They're certainly not as incredibly crazy as Debbie's and Amy's, but it's also those subtle things that we still experience even now.
Thank you, Amy. I think, this was my opportunity to speak with all of you last week and connect. I'm so excited about the breadth and depth that we have with all of your experiences. And so as we kind of kick this off, during your career in intercollegiate athletics, based on association work, full-time jobs, and service, what inequities have you seen exposed as part of the gender gap? Debbie, you want to kick us off?
The interesting thing, remember, I was in intercollegiate athletics 43 years. So, I mean, where would we begin? I think what I hope the attendees understand is what Title IX is, and that it was one of the most important pieces of civil rights legislation ever passed in this nation. So in the summer of 1972, President Richard Nixon signed this into law as part of the Education Amendment Act. And, people think about it generally as being sports specific, and it was never designed for that. At that point in time, women routinely were being turned down for admission to medical schools and law schools when their scores were better than others. And the general, I know this sounds incredulous 49 years later, but they were being told, you need to be at home, you need to raise your family, your husband, these men need these degrees because they're going to be taking care of their families. So, all it was designed to do was prohibit, sex-based discrimination in any school that receives federal funding for its programs, which is most schools. It was introduced by Birch, I think his name is pronounced Bay, B-A-Y-H, Birch Bay, who was from Indiana, who was a senator from Indiana, and Patsy Mink. She was a representative, House Representative from Hawaii. And, we've used the 3 prongs to determine if Title IX is being followed all these years, and it's really very outdated. The first prong being what's known, generally as safe harbor, where the undergraduate male to female population is tied to the number of participants and also the scholarships that are provided, scholarship support provided, men to women. The second one is so outdated, it's called continuing expansion. So would we really believe that 49 years later, a school has a right to say, we're considering expanding our women's program? I think we will. I think we're going to do that. In 5 years, we're going to add field hockey. I mean, that should go. That should be gone. These are standards that were created by the Office of Civil Rights. It's not part of the law. It's just, meat on the bone. How do you know that you're doing well in Title IX? And the third prong was meeting the needs of the underrepresented sex, which is usually women. And that one's very murky. They've been around and round about how to determine, whether or not that's in place at a given school. And so the safe harbor is really the place you want to be as an institution. And there are 11 programmatic areas that have to do with the locker rooms, the uniforms, the travel, the recruiting budgets, the marketing budgets, those kinds of things. But it was never designed originally for athletics, but that's what gets all the attention.
I'll jump in there. Debbie, thanks for, providing that history. It is so important. And sometimes those of us who've been in this business, we kind of take for granted that everyone understands the history of how it came to be. But I think it is really important to understand that it was not, a provision written about athletics. It's Title IX itself is only 37 words. And think about the impact those 37 words have made across the lives of women and girls in education through athletics. And it's also interesting to note that, how times change and things evolve, but the NCAA actually challenged the application of Title IX to sports. And there were, hand wringing that, bringing women's sports into this is going to be the death of football, and we're going to, where's our money going to go? And so we see how that's turned out. And actually 1981 was when the NCAA first held NCAA championships. So in the lifespan of NCAA sports and college sports, women's sports are still, relatively young in the college sport landscape. And to, looking at participation, that being, one of the key indicators that Debbie outlined in college sports, just looking at high school sports as well before Title IX, 1 in 27 high school girls played sports. And today that's better than 2 out of 5. And we all of us benefited from Title IX, but there's just so many statistics that show just, the positive impact on young girls participating in sports, from, health to school success to success later in life. I was struck several years ago. EY did a study that showed 96% of female senior executives or CEOs played high school or college sports. So the stats are there every which way you look at them in terms of the benefits. And going back to the question of what progress has been seen, certainly the progress in participation in college sports has increased, and the impact on the laundry list that Debbie identified, the scholarships, modes of travel. I can remember as a college athlete taking a long bus trip to Maryland when the men's basketball team got to fly there, and things like that. Not to single out my school, but that was widespread at the time. That was not, an anomaly. But things like that, don't happen or shouldn't happen anymore, but don't happen. And then the other areas, scheduling, across the board, we've seen progress in all those areas. And clearly there's still a lot of work to do, or we wouldn't have had the controversy we just had just a month ago.
Yeah, so let's dive into that a little bit more, Amy. We have opportunities. Title IX has definitely helped with the progression, and so kind of where you were getting at, why is it important for us to address the inequities between men's and women's sports? Especially with we just saw with the weight room differences between men's and women's basketball during the NCAA tournament. And, we know that some of this is still going on, right? And then the exposure with social media and what we see, it kind of sheds light on it more. So, why is it important for us to be paying attention to this landscape?
I'll jump in here. I think so the weight room and sort of what happened on social media was just one aspect of it, right? I think if we try to make it just about that, we're really missing the opportunity and we're missing the boat on the bigger discussion and the bigger list of concerns that I think are really being discussed in all circles right now. And that's important, right? It's unfortunate and it's a shame that it had to come about at the premier event for women's basketball, but it is an opportunity to really start to further dive into all of those various inequities, because we need to not think that it's just that weight room conversation. It runs far deeper than that. So again, unfortunate that in 2021 that happens, as we're supposed to be celebrating the opportunity that these unbelievable female athletes are having, and in a year that is been just like no other for everybody in terms of a pandemic. But I guess trying to be the optimism on the optimism scale is it creates the opportunity to hopefully create even more change and more lasting change and critical change.
Thank you, Amy. Amy or Debbie, anything to add to that?
Well, I think the reason it matters is that it's a big statement about value and the value of women and the women's championships. I have empathy, though. My empathy, I think, rises out of the 29 years as a director of athletics and trying so hard to be sure that the experience for women is the same as it is for men as related to, a good experience. They're an equitable experience. They obviously failed, and time will tell whether or not the message was heard and it changes things. But I am an eternal optimist, and having the perspective of being a college athlete in 1972 when the law was passed, and then all these years later, the decades that have passed and seen the incredible changes, most of which were positive. I think you said it, Kara, I think, or maybe it was Amy Perko, but we aren't where we need to be, but we surely are not where we were. Mm-hmm. And we've made a lot of progress. So I have some empathy, but I take a wait and see attitude on what happens next.
So I'll jump in as well in terms of, I want to go back to the word Debbie said, and it's the word of value. And this is about what do we as a society value? And in college sports, the NCAA, one of its constitutional principles is to conduct its operations in a manner free of gender bias. That's stated at the very front and should be guiding everything they do. And that's why it's important to get it right as well. And the NCAA should be setting the standard. And in fact, frankly, the NCAA member schools expect better, and most would not allow, those kinds of disparities on their own campus. But I was encouraged to the point my colleagues have made. The NCAA did name an outside law firm to conduct the review that, as Amy pointed out, is an opportunity, and it's going to go much further than just the women's basketball championship. So the other thing that, I think gives me hope and that is a positive out of this was just the widespread reaction across men, women, boys, girls, just the ages, and the immediate reaction was, this can't be. And so just that being kind of the consensus reaction, I think also shows progress from a societal, cultural viewpoint on this issue.
Thank you, Amy. And kind of pulling off of when you were talking about the NCAA and working through their value when we talk about gender bias, you know, one of the things that we all had discussed was in regards to gender identity, you know, how do we ensure transgender student athletes they have access to collegiate sports based on how they choose to identify. So when we think about this, maybe in the areas of your work, what needs attention in this area as we move forward into the future?
I guess I'll start. I'm interested in what the two Amy's have to say. I'd like to point our participants to two different documents to read. We can't begin to cover them because of the breadth of them, but in this conversation, but I found them to both be really important in this discussion. And one is a document created by a group called the Women's Sports Policy Working Group on transgender participation. And I'm going to give you even how to get there to get the document. It's all lowercase, all one word, Women's Sports Policy.org, all one word. And this group has any number of famous female Olympians and administrators like Donald Lopiano, Nancy Hogshead, Donna DeVerona, Billie Jean King. They have put together a very thoughtful, I believe it's thoughtful policy on what this could look like to being fair to transgenders while remembering biological females. That I'm one of those biological females, waited a long time to have the opportunity to be able to compete. And, you know, my primary loyalty is to that group. I admit that, but I was impressed with what this paper and what they had put together in that regard. So I would just, it's worth reading. The second communication I think would be useful was actually recently in the Washington Post, and it was April 15th article by Will Hobson. Will, I think, generally writes for athletics on sport, but it's the title of it was "The Fight for the Future of Transgender Athletes." And the reason I recommend it is because he references the Women's Sports Policy Working Group plan. And I was surprised there are a number of transgender organizations who did not like the plan and felt it was not sufficient. So I have to say that I'm not particularly optimistic about where this is going to go, because there's a wide range of opinions. And I thought that the group of the Women's Sports Policy Working Group just did a great job of trying to address all the questions and issues and concerns, pre-puberty, post-puberty, testosterone, hormone therapy. I mean, it ran the gamut. And they also included the International Olympic Committee recommendations and the NCAA President's Group has already reconfirmed their commitment to transgender participation. But I think the question is under what circumstances in order to best ensure that biological female, which is a medical term, I might add, this is science, biological females will not be disadvantaged. That's my focus.
Thank you, Debbie. Amy, want to jump in?
Go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, Debbie was very eloquent and obviously came armed with some really good information that I will definitely look up after this opportunity. You know, I think when we have discussions as a conference, right, our institutions are very proud, and they're very vocal about, and in their actions, about the ACC's commitment to upholding the values of equality, diversity, inclusion, and non-discrimination, right? And have shown that on a number of occasions. You know, I think back to, especially in the state, when there was, you know, I'm sure everybody can probably remember HB2, I think is what everybody referred to it as, if they didn't call it the bathroom bill. And the fact that our presidents decided to move championships out of neutral site championships out of the state of North Carolina, and that occasion, you know, I don't know, I don't have specific comments as Debbie did. I thought she did a great job and shared some great information, but I think there's a lot of discussion that's going to continue to happen around, you know, around this topic for sure.
Thank you, Amy.
Yeah, I would just add to that, you know, our work, our commission supports the equal and fair treatment of all people with regard to the participation in college sports. This particular topic, as pointed out by my colleagues, is one that really deserves a lot of thoughtful examination and discussion. And I personally have a lot of respect for, you know, certainly the NCAA's work on this, the Women's Sports Foundation, and Nancy Hogshead McCarr's group, I think is doing really thoughtful work and really studying these issues that have a lot of scientific and research that is required to understand this issue.
Thank you, Amy. So we got time for one more question from me, and then we're going to turn it over to Shana for Q&A. You know, early on, we were talking about the history of Title IX, and you know, and talking about what is its relevancy now. So the question I have is, you know, when will we be able to tell if Title IX worked? Is it now? And if so, what's next?
It's a big question. I am not going to, you know, I'm not going to claim that I have any sort of answers in regards to that. But I do think that there has to be a feeling and a sense of progress and accomplishments. I don't know that, can't speak for others. I don't know that I'll ever feel satisfied, because I think we would always want more. We'd always want to enhance what we currently have, or strive to raise the bar, or something new, right? I think that's what we do in life. I will say that, you know, I'm proud to be a small part of some really significant things that have happened in the ACC. And one of them is, you can't see it, but in front of me is the ACC network. The ACC network's on, and today we're showing 4 quarterfinals of the ACC Women's Lacrosse Championship. And one of the important aspects of launching that network was for the opportunity for our schools and for our conference to showcase the incredible student athletes, female student athletes that are in our league. So that's one small example, but, you know, again, I'll go back to, I'm not sure any of us that are on this call or on this panel are ever going to say we're going to be satisfied, or we're going to feel like we crossed the finish line. I think there'll always be something more, and there should be.
Debbie or Amy?
Yeah, so I'll jump in and say, you know, agree with Amy that there's always going to be work ahead. And we know, you know, there's been some obvious issues that have come up just this year where it's going to need to have some urgency in addressing. But clearly Title IX has worked in terms of the impact and the opportunities. And, you know, I'm a beneficiary of that. I'm a beneficiary of, as a young girl, being able to go to the K-Yale basketball camp. And that's a distinct memory I have that I didn't just say because Debbie's also on the panel, but that was one of my first memories of seeing a female in sport who was so successful and inspired young girls like myself who loved the sport of basketball, but had an impact to and inspiring even beyond basketball. And the opportunities I had as a young girl, you know, participating in a community 5th and 6th grade basketball program because our community leader came on board. The YMCA hired a female after Title IX and said, your job is to create community girls sports. And that's what she did. And so I had those opportunities as an early participant that my sisters, 4 and 6 years older than me, didn't have, because Title IX, didn't come around in time for them.
Thank you, Amy.
So Dr. Lucia, I'm going to hop in here and ask some questions to our panelists. So the first question comes from Kylie Hebert, and she says, we talk a lot about the disadvantages that we face as women in sport and in the sport industry, but can you think of any time that maybe being a woman has been an advantage in your career, whether athletically or professionally? So I'll let you think on that for a second, and then Amy Perko, if you want to kick us off, and then we can have the other two join in on their thoughts on that question.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is I think that one of the great opportunities in being part of a team, whether that's a sports team or an executive team, a business team, is really the diversity of life experiences and perspectives when you're trying to achieve a goal. And I think sometimes, just experiences I have as a female, I look at issues and problem solving maybe a little bit differently. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. But I know that I certainly value on the work that we do, just the diversity of life experiences we have, among our commission members and perspectives in trying to address issues.
Debbie, what about you?
This is such an odd way, like an advantage to being a female in athletics. There are advantages to having the opportunity, as Amy just pointed out, even the statistics she cited of female executives and how many of them participated in either high school sports or in collegiate sports. But in terms of just like it's good to be a female versus being a male because you have advantage, what would be that advantage? Sorry, I can't think of anything. I'd like to. But no, it hasn't been like that. It's all good in the sense that the opportunities are amazing that, as Amy points out, we did not have. People like me, though, I was pre-Title IX in high school and junior high school and had those opportunities. Strangely enough, in the state of North Carolina, if you went to a county school, you had organized athletics starting in the 7th grade. If you went to the city school systems in Greensboro or in Burlington, as an example, you had nothing. There was no varsity sport. So I'm just blessed that I was in the county. So I never knew for the longest time there was something odd about this, or that others never had that opportunity in my age bracket. But just the thought that what would be an advantage to being a female in intercollegiate athletics, sorry, I can't think of anything. I mean, I'm just grateful we have that opportunity and we've made such progress.
So I know we probably have other ones to get to, but I want to jump in here because Debbie actually hit on something that I was going to say if I was prompted, and that's, listen, I'm probably older than a majority of folks that are listening to this panel right now. I'm not totally confident, but I would guess. But I think that I would say the thank you to Debbie and what she and her colleagues went through. So that's why I feel like I'm at an advantage and had that because other people blazed the trail and were willing, and they had to live through different circumstances than I did during, my years as in high school and college and beyond. So the fact that, I, as a young, administrator at the conference office, I got to sit in a room and see that Debbie Yao was sitting in an athletic director chair at the University of Maryland and then sitting in an athletic director chair at NC State University. So I know I feel incredibly fortunate for that, but I also know that that's why my perspective is different than Debbie's on that.
And I'm gonna lead into my next question here. So you all are leaders of your organization. So you've been at the very top, the C-suite, if you will, and there's a lot of research on why maybe women don't take those professional chances, whether that's going from being an assistant coach to a head coach, or going from a assistant athletic director to an athletic director. And Amy Yacola, you spoke to just you know, when you see someone in those positions, you believe you can be in those positions, sort of the see it and be it type of mentality. So what kind of advice would you give our ladies and our men that are listening on how we can continue to encourage the professional growth and the risk taking that maybe isn't maybe as natural, or perhaps just not as encouraged for those that are watching? Because I think that's something that's important, that mentorship and that tapping on the shoulder and saying, hey, you can do this. You're a great athlete. You're a great student. You're a great professional. Now let's take a chance here and go after this or after that. So what kind of advice maybe would you give, since you are sort of looking, you've worked your way up to the top of certain organizations? Amy, Nicole, I'll let you jump off with that one.
Sure, I'll keep it brief. I mean, I think that it's got to be about what we can do individually, right? And so when I'm fortunate enough to address a class at various institutions, whether high school or college, the first thing I'll say is, hey, you know what? Your teacher, your professor has my contact information. Don't hesitate to reach out, ask me questions. You know, do I think there was a lot of hard work that I put in? I do, but I also will be the first to tell folks that, you know, that surround yourself with people that believe in you and that are willing to give you opportunities. I was very fortunate to have that, and will forever be grateful for those opportunities. And I also think that it's Amy Perko mentioned it earlier. It's also making sure that you're surrounded by people that can provide and create and offer different, you know, different voices and different ideas and different backgrounds. And so, you know, challenge yourself to do that in your everyday, right? Ask different perspectives and opinions, because those are important to get as we look to make the right decision or the best decision or the decision that's important to make.
So Amy hit on something that's probably the single most important thing, and that's who is close to you and whose advice you take. So if you have people around you who not just support you, but are smart people and intuitive people who give you good advice, you're way ahead of the game in terms of what your career is going to look like 2 or 3 decades later. And I had that, you know, in family members, but I also had it in a husband of now 37 years who kept saying, go for it, you can do it. And, you know, I'll take care of this, I'll take care of that, as any good partner would. I would suggest to both the men and the women on the call to take a bad job. Please quit waiting on the perfect job. It's not there and you're not going to get it. Just go ahead and take a bad job and make it better, and then use that as a springboard for something else. And when you have those opportunities and you're in a position of authority, model the right behavior. Don't say to yourself, well, they didn't treat us well and we're not going to treat them well. Well, then how do you like it? The shoe's on the other foot now. No, don't do that. Do the right thing and hire the best person, you know, for the job. I had a great boss at Maryland. I've had several. I had Britt Kerwin, but I also had a guy named a president named Dan Moat. And one of the things he said to me that I'll never forget is this. One day he said to me in a one-on-one meeting, he said, Debbie, A people hire A people, and B people hire C people. And I said, what does that mean? And he said, it means that when you're good at what you do and you're confident, you're looking to surround yourself with the very best talent. But when you're not secure in who you are professionally or what you know, you become a B, and Bs always hire Cs. They hire people who they're pretty sure are lesser because they don't want to ever be challenged. Well, that was early in his tenure around, because Dr. Kerwin was only there 4 years with me before he went to Ohio State. So I think this was around 1998. And I never forgot that. And I bet both Amy's have people who've spoken into their lives with some wisdom that they have never forgotten. And it's been a guiding principle for them.
That's great. That's great, Debbie. I'll add something I talk about in terms of just advice for success. And it comes back to something actually I learned at KYAL's basketball camp. And as a former basketball coach, Debbie, you might appreciate this as well. It goes back to that acronym of BEEF, how to shoot, balance, you know, eyes on your goal, stay focused, And the other E is extension, extending that elbow. And I also talk about that in terms of preparation, really extending yourself outside your comfort zone. Don't be afraid to extend yourself. And then the F is the follow through. You can do the job, you can have great plans, but if you don't follow through on them, it doesn't go anywhere. So that follow through is really important to your getting a job, success in job, and making a good basketball shot. So
I like it. So you just said this in another way. Focus on what you're going to, not on what you're going through.
Yeah.
So you just said that.
Yeah.
And it's true.
Oh, I love that. Focus on what you're going to, not what you're going through. Love that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing those perspectives on the gender gap in athletics, what you've learned as we're close to celebrating 50 years of the passing of Title IX and those opportunities. I'm a beneficiary. I played college softball, and it's something I runs through my blood. And so I'm very grateful for this awesome panel here. And so now we're going to take a short break and we'll resume in about 3 minutes. And I hope you enjoy this video as we learn from our student athletes and their perspectives on college athletics. I can't wait. All right, we are going to get started with our final panel of the evening. And this is a panel on the perspectives from the student athletes themselves. And so I'm going to let Natalie Cummins, who is an Elon University volleyball player, take it away. She is going to serve as the moderator of the panel, and we are excited to hear from each of you. Thank you for being here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Dabbs, for the introduction. Again, my name is Natalie Cummins, and I'm an Elon volleyball player and am a senior who will be graduating and also taking a COVID 5th year. Luckily, I'm just going to go ahead and let each of the other panelists introduce themselves. And Emma, I'll let you go ahead and start.
Okay, I'm Emma Seif. I go to Wofford College. I play lacrosse. I'm a junior and I'm majoring in biology.
My name is Christopher Holiday. I go to UNC Chapel Hill. I play football and I'm a freshman. And my major is economics and sports administration.
Okay, Devin, if you could introduce yourself, please. Okay, we'll get back to Devin if he might be experiencing some technical difficulties. So we're really just gonna jump right in today. We've been having other panels discussing things like name, image, and likeness and Title IX. And these have all been very prevalent issues. We know NIL rules are gonna be changing hopefully in the upcoming summer. But another huge discussion in sport has been social injustices that have been happening. Particularly during the past year, we've seen a lot of different events around our world occurring. And I'm just gonna start, and Christopher, we'll just start with you and then let the panelists pick up. Do you think that it's appropriate for sport organizations like UNC Chapel Hill or anyone's respective college or university to be addressing these social injustices? Or do you think that sports should avoid talking about certain topics like this?
Yeah, I think that sports absolutely should talk about this. I think that when you talk about a college sports organization, the main purpose of a college is to educate and mold the future generations of America. And so when you think of college athletics, that's their goal. Their goal is to mold the future generations of America, instill the values that we want our next generation to have, and realize what's important for the next generation as we go forward. And so I think that it is important for the coaches, the administrators, and the players to be able to talk openly about different injustices that they see and what they understand to be wrong. And so I think that when you aren't able to discuss those, that's when you start to see a lag and different issues trickle down to next generations.
Yeah, I completely agree with Christopher. I think sports have a huge, powerful platform, and I feel like everyone is connected to a sport somehow, whether it's like a favorite team or something like that. And sports have the power to like promote like social change, and they touch like people of all ages, especially what Chris was saying is like future generations, especially like as a like college platform. You need to like promote what you stand for, and you're trying to like change the world, and you're also trying to take the people that are coming into your college with like the same like values, and like make sure it's ingrained like what you will and like will not allow.
Great, thank you guys. Devin, are you there by chance? Okay, sorry, just double checking, but we'll go into the next thing. So, oh, Devin's there. Okay, Devin, I think you're muted. I think you may be muted or your audio is separate. Just keep talking, and when I hear you, we'll add you into the conversation. I'm sorry. So those are really great responses, and things like that. Like certain universities and colleges may be more hesitant to speak out on topics like that just because they know that it can cause some controversy or things like that. But I know student athletes do really feel like they have these suggestions for their athletic departments. Like maybe they would recommend to their athletic department to speak out about these things, or maybe other injustices occurring, like things regarding Title IX and gender disparity. When it comes to these things, do you feel like your university actively listens to the recommendations you or your fellow teammates may be making to the athletic department? Or do you feel as though things might kind of just go under the rug and not really be addressed?
Well, I can speak for UNC Chapel Hill. So there's more than 800 athletes at UNC Chapel under the athletic department. So I think every team has a different issue. Every team has a different problem that they're seeking to find. And so the way that UNC Chapel handles it is they allow their players to be empowered. So every team has a couple leaders. And so those leaders are essentially part of the larger organization of UNC Student Athlete Advisory Council. And so by allowing a smaller group of people to be able to make the decision and be able to bring issues from different teams together, we can see if there's any common denominators or any issues that come up in multiple different scenarios. And so when you have all that together, then you can bring it up to the administration, and it's a lot more likely to be taken seriously if more people are behind it.
For Wofford, for the student athletes, SAC is really, really big here. And I think that has been really like good for like hearing the athletes, because at the end of like each of our like meeting, they let us like suggest things or like talk openly about things that we have problems with. And also we have a committee that's based around social change. So I think that personally, I think Wofford has done like a really good job at addressing it, especially through SAC.
Awesome. Thank you so much. SAC is also really big at Elon. We have a lot of representatives from all the teams, and it's a really nice way to have the teams come together and give feedback to the university. Kind of taking a turn here. So just kind of talking about how our athletic department can kind of influence our experiences. Something that's more on a personal level. How does your head coach impact your overall experience as a student athlete?
I think your coach has a huge impact on it, because your coach is the one that creates the environment. Is it a positive or is it a negative environment? Is it one that you're dreading to go to or you're excited to go to? But also, I think compared to like high school, I've noticed this more, that I have more control over my mind than I did before. So yes, my coach influences a lot, but also I control like how I'm thinking that day. If I'm going to come in with a positive mindset, am I going to let what my coach said to me at practice affect the rest of my day? Am I going to just like keep the 3 hours that I'm with her, just the 3 hours with her? Am I going to carry the stress like with me the rest of the day? So I think, yes, it does, but also like you have to be very mentally tough, and like make sure you check on yourself and just control positive thoughts all the time.
Yeah, and to add on that, I do think that the coach has to set the standard, the head coach. It all comes back to them at the end of the day. And so the environment that they set and the standard that they set is what is followed. In terms of football, I feel as though the assistant coaches, the training staff, the strength coaches more of set kind of the specific environment to the person, because when you have 120 players, you're not going to see the coach on a daily basis, specifically the head coach. You'll see your assistant coach a lot more often, your strength coach a lot more often. But in terms of your head coach, he has so many people to manage that you won't see him as often. And so I think that it's important for the head coach to get across his point to his assistant coaches, to the people below him, so that they understand what kind of tone needs to be set and how everyone in the building should be feeling.
Great. Thank you guys so much. And you both brought up points about how large of a role your head coach and also assistant coaches have in your student athlete experience. And as you were going through your recruitment process in high school, were there any differences between the way, or any differences between your expectations going into college versus the realities you've now lived while being a student athlete in college?
I think when you're getting recruited, you only see the good things of playing a sport at a collegiate level. And also like when you're getting recruited, they kind of like, oh, you get this and you get this, and here are like perks and stuff. But the other sides aren't really talked about. So I think like as a freshman, you come in with all these standards, and sometimes you have to realize that, yeah, they keep those standards, but there's also other things that come with it. But as like an atmosphere, I think personally I chose like a good school to go to, and like the environment of like my team and everything was exactly how I expected it to be. Like I think the tour and meeting the players and everything there, that's exactly how I expected everything to be. So on that side, I didn't have any surprises, but just as a collegiate athlete, I think you don't understand like the whole dynamic until you're actually in it.
Yeah, I agree with Emma wholeheartedly. I think my mom used to have a saying that if it was easy, everyone would do it. I think that's a pretty common saying. And so I think everyone can't be a college athlete just because the time and the commitment and the grind that you have to put in, day out, those 6 days a week, 7 days a week, and you're always doing it. And it's not something that's just for, that fall season. It's an all year thing. And so I think that that doesn't get talked as much during the recruiting process. You see the fall season or you see the winter season or whatever season you're looking at for the sport, but I don't think you see the winter workouts or the spring workouts as much. And so I think that a lot of recruits just don't recognize what they're going to be doing day in, day out. That's not during the season on game day.
Yeah, those are definitely great answers. The glamorous sides are definitely showed during the recruitment process, and they definitely don't take you along to the 6 a.m. workout on your official visit most times. That's really good feedback. So kind of going into just the way student athletes have dedicated themselves to being a full-time student and a full-time athlete. We know that NIL laws are in the process of being reviewed, and hopefully some outcomes will finally be released this summer. Personally, I want to ask both of you, how would NIL laws being passed directly affect you as student athletes?
I think it's kind of harder playing at like a smaller school and like lacrosse. Like I don't think it's going to affect me that much because I just don't think that my like name and likeness is like as big, as compared to somebody else. So I personally don't think it's going to bother me as much, but what I am scared is that it might like change the atmosphere of college and playing in college. I understand like the NIL like laws, but I just like don't want it to take away from like the grind of like being a collegiate athlete. But I personally don't think it's going to affect me that much.
Yeah. And so I think that it's going to end up affecting revenue sports. I think that's kind of what Emma was hinting at. And so for me personally, it probably wouldn't affect me as much just because I think that it would end up affecting the top players on the top teams more often than it'll affect honestly anyone. And so I think that I would see teammates that may be able to become social media influencers and have different brand opportunities. And so that brings into the question whether they can also be able to focus full-time on being a student athlete, because if they have other things on the side, then it's a lot harder, because we already talked about how much of a grind it is day in, day out, how much you have to do on your plate. You have school and you have athletics. And so adding a third thing can be really difficult. And I think some people are going to have a really hard time managing it.
Yeah, I agree for sure. I apologize about these technical difficulties, y'all. But as far as giving athletes that extra job, I think it's great for them. I feel like it's going to benefit them in the long run, because at the end of the day, an athlete that's well-rounded, that's able to do things other than their sports, I feel like it's going to end up making them stronger in the business force when they graduate.
Yeah, that's great feedback, and something that a lot of people don't think of when it comes to NIL, because I know when I first heard about it, I was thinking, oh, I'm just a women's volleyball player in little town of Elon. Like I'm probably not gonna have a huge social media deal, but certain things are like using my student athlete status to have like a summer camp in my hometown for volleyball, or partnering with like the local pizza shop on campus and being able to use my name, image, and likeness for that. So there are a wider range of opportunities for athletes at several different levels that personally I didn't know about, and I continue to learn about every day. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how that plays out this summer. Okay, So kind of talking or taking a different direction, talking about postgraduate opportunities. How does your university prepare you for the next steps after you graduate from college, whether it's looking to become a professional athlete or starting a career or anything like that? What kind of resources has your university offered to you to help you make that transition?
Wofford is actually just really good at that besides like being an athlete. They just like being in a smaller college, they really focus on like what our next steps are. But on like the student athlete part, our like advisor like sits down with us and like we have many check-ins and they help us plan for the future. I think they've done a really good job of preparing me like for my future and setting like goals and like being like make sure you have X, Y, and Z done by this time if you wanna apply here. So I think Wofford has done a very good job.
Yeah, for UNC, it's something sort of similar. You know, there's a lot of networking events. We get put in touch with people all the time. And so if you go to your advisor, if you go to a coach and you tell them, I'm interested in this field, do you know anyone? They're more than willing to help out and they're more than willing to automatically send some contact info or some letter of recommendation that way. And then also within the whole athletic department, there's a leadership academy. And so I think leadership's a really important role for somebody to be able to take on in order to be able to be successful in the job market. And so there's a leadership academy that everyone automatically becomes a part of and they're able to do throughout their time at UNC. And so those are really important steps that people can take while they're at UNC.
Yes, at AV University, they do have a great system where they promote self-directed learning a whole lot. Where you know, of course, in a master's program, you know, you're not really in a situation where you're trying to. It's not the same style as undergrad, of course. So it's pretty cool that, you know, at AV University they influence from your freshman year on to make sure you're self-directed learning. And another opportunity that they give us is they have a leadership council and they encourage a lot of students to make sure they're a part of that as well, so that they can be prepared to possibly get into a master's program or a doctorate program after they graduate, because they really emphasize how, you know, just having an undergrad degree is it's good to have, but you know, in this world today, it's really nice to try to get a master's degree as well. So
Great, thank you guys. Something else we can talk about is Title IX. I'm sure y'all saw it coming. It's a huge topic. It always has been, and it will be for a long time. There's a big debate, Chris and Devin, y'all being football players. Clearly, the football team does take up a lot of scholarships for other male sports when it comes to Title IX regulation. So my question to you guys is, do you think that football scholarship spots should be exempt from Title IX laws, or do you feel like they should continue to be included? And based on your answer, how would that kind of affect your school's athletic program?
I would say that Title IX laws should continue to include football programs only just because I think that for some schools, there would be less incentive. They may not necessarily have to add any more male sports to make up for the loss of football scholarships to match female sports. And so then I think you lead into different inequities that could occur if schools could just say drop female sports just because they no longer have this certain amount of scholarship limit that they need to meet. And so I think just by not having football scholarships, even though they should be including female sports, no matter what, I think that you run the risk of losing a lot of different opportunities for people.
yeah, that's a great answer by Chris. I feel like, you know, as far as the situation with the football team and the scholarships, I think it's a situation where there's too many scholarships in the football area. I feel like too many schools rely on the football team to, whether it's recruiting or, you know, with the Title IX situation, I feel like it's a little too heavy with the football teams for sure. At Avery University, I'll be honest, you know, our athletic director, Ms. Meg Stevens, she does a great job with making sure that she distributes the scholarships evenly throughout all the teams, but it's a situation where you can see that, a majority of the football team is holding a lot more weight than some of the other teams. And that's not right, in my opinion. I don't care about the popularity of the sport or how many people are on the team. I feel like it should end up being in a more of an even situation.
I think that I see like many sides of this, but I think if we excluded football from it, then it would kind of be going against the point of Title IX, because that's why Title IX was there. So if we exclude like a male sport, I feel like it's just kind of going against what the law like states.
Great. All right. Well, we're entering into the final 10 minutes that we have. So I want to ask you guys each, what are the best things in your opinion about being a student athlete? And on the flip side, what are some things in your opinion that could be improved? And I'll say, Chris, you can go ahead and start.
Yeah. So I think the best things, I think all of us would agree, are the people you meet, the different communities you get to be a part of, just because there's everyone that's a student athlete with you. And then there's also the managers, the trainers, the different students that you get to meet, and the different opportunities you get to go. There are places that I've got to go as a student athlete that I would have never gone on my own. And so I think those travel experiences are amazing. And then I also think the fact that you kind of have a sort of parent looking after you at college. I think that a lot of people are really nervous when they go to college that they're not going to know anyone and there's not going to be anyone looking out for them when they leave their house. But when you're within a sports organization, you kind of have someone looking out for them. I do think that the kind of not so bad things are, as we talked about, the time commitment, and that you may have to turn down different opportunities on weekends or at nights because you have to get that homework done because you have practice the next morning or you have practice that night. And so you're not going to have time to do that homework at another point. And so I think that it's the time commitments, and will always be time commitments, for how you have to structure your day.
I agree that the best part is definitely the people that you meet. Like I've made 26 best friends, and I get to share like all these new experiences with them, and I get to work hard with them, and like we all like feel like the same emotions, and like it just has brought like amazing people into my life. And I think that also the best part too, I've grown a lot. Like being an athlete has forced me to grow in ways I didn't expect at all. And I think my mental toughness is a lot stronger because of it. But also I think one thing that could be fixed is like the mental health side of being an athlete. It's like going into college is already one big transition, and then I think the intensity and the level of play too is something really, really hard to get like used to. And then also the pressure that you've put on yourself. I think that like each sport should have like a sports psychologist. Like I think that mental health has been talked about a lot more recently, but I don't think that it's really getting as much as it should.
Yeah, those are some great points, Chris and Emma. I would love to say that yes, relationships is definitely probably the best part about being a part of any type of team. I feel like some of the friends that I've made, I can do business with them down the road, which is something that's really interesting. But also the time management alone, just being able to juggle different things around as far as class, as far as clubs and organizations that you're a part of. It just makes you a more well-rounded person, in my opinion. And as well as what Emma said about mental health, I mean, that's a big point because, I mean, a lot of people are going through a lot of stuff and they don't say anything. And especially when you're a part of a team, and I'm gonna use, my team for example, the football team, you got to be the tough guy or something like that. You can't talk about things. I feel like there should be a lot more open conversations between athletes, and even talking, about situations that happen within teams with other teams. So a football team and a volleyball team, or softball team and a baseball team. I feel like there should be a lot more conversations with teams as well. But other than that, I believe the relationship is the best part about being a student athlete.
Great. Thank you guys so much. Y'all touched on some really, really great points. And Emma and Devin, you were talking about the mental health stuff at the end. And I'm a huge advocate for mental health, and sports psychology is a career that I'm looking to follow through with in my future years of school and so on. Something I'm really interested in for each of you guys is, what kind of resources has your either university in general or athletic department been able to provide for you guys to help you kind of not only navigate the physical side, like having athletic trainers, but also navigating the mental side of your sport and being a student athlete?
Well, at least with my coach, she like before, like say we have like a 2-week game, like 2 games in 1 week, and it's very stressful. Like she like always gets like a therapist or like somebody from the school to come and talk to us, and we do like breathing exercises and like a lot of like mindless things to calm us down. So I think personally my coach has like done a very good job on trying to like refocus us whenever she can tell that a lot of us are stressed out. And then as like a school or just like athletics, back to like SAC, another committee is mental health, and and like Wofford's very good at making sure you know who to call whenever you can call them whatever. And then our trainer is always like willing to tell us like the sports psychologist we can reach out to. So I think I think that especially this year with like COVID and everything, I think they've made it like a bigger effort to show like they're here and giving us resources.
At AV University, we have a mental health representative that students are recommended to go talk to. Her name is Miss Joan, and she's great, and she works with us, and it's a perfect situation. But she's not the only person that we can go to. The SET office, the Student Engagement Center, they also provide just loads of work study students that actually are in leadership roles to aid people with any type of mental issue. So it's actually a very good situation. But also, like as far as my personal team, prayer is really a big thing. We pride ourselves with having the cornerstone of faith for our team. With just praising Jesus Christ, I'll be honest, and us praying together before and after practice, that helps a lot of us stay sane throughout the season. So that's one of the big things that we have a part of our university.
Yeah, and UNC has 2 sports psychologists that any athletes can go see whenever they feel the need to, as well as a whole psychologist department for the entire university. So those are always open to us as resources if we ever need to go talk to someone. And then I think an important one for me has always just been going to talk to people that I view as leaders on the team, just because they've been in the same shoes that I've been in and understand what I'm going through.
So Natalie, I'm gonna hop in here. We've got some questions for the panelists, and now you become a full panelist as well. So kudos to your moderating job and your, dual roles, right? But that's sort of ironic, student athlete dual roles. So what is Elon doing to support your mental health?
Yeah, so right now, Elon has been working with UNC Greensboro's graduate program, and they're working with sports psychologist students in the program and sending them over to Elon and working with different teams, which has been really helpful. And we're about to work with our third, starting on Monday, I believe, third UNCG student. And my time with these students in the past has not only helped me as a student athlete, but it's actually helped me understand my passions in my career, and that this is something that I want to turn around and do for other students once my time as a student athlete is up. So I'm not going to sit here and say everything's perfect. There's so much more that has to be done, but I am pretty grateful that Elon is trying to stay on top of it and integrate mental health into their athletic department's values.
Thank you. So we have a question here from Ashley Brackett, and Emma, I'm going to let you start. How do you think COVID-19 has and will affect the transfer portal and allowing athletes that extra year of eligibility? So I'm going to let all four of you answer that, but Emma, let's start with you and then we'll go Chris, Natalie, and Devin.
I've thought about this a lot, actually. My team was talking about earlier. I don't really know, but I think that like teams, especially this year, have been able to like stack their teams. So people are taking their like fifth year, their COVID year, which is like stacking the team. And I think it's going to, after this year, I think it's going to like flood the portal. And I think that, I don't know. I think it's going to get like, I think that it's going to cause like a lot more transfers and a lot more chaos in that. But I think that, but I personally like the COVID year. Like I like that I have that option. So I just think that teams are able to stack a little more and use that as a recruiting process too.
Yeah, I agree with Emma. I think that more people are going to enter the portal. The biggest concern with that is I feel like there's not going to be as many spots just because not as many people are always going to be transferring as there are spots. And a lot of people think that they have the opportunity to go to another place that they may not be able to attend. And so I think that's going to leave a lot of people in the portal with nowhere to go. And then they're going to try to go back and that opportunity is not going to still be there. So I think that that is an inherent risk that comes with entering the portal, especially at a time like now.
Yeah, I mean, you guys kind of touched on it, but with this COVID-19 year of eligibility, that just makes everyone, I mean, that gives everyone another chance, at least another season, if not a whole year at school. And for people who are normally transferring or entering the transfer portal before COVID hit, that's just going to create more competition and I guess hopefully raise the level of play or something. I don't know. It's going to be crazy though. And there's going to be way more people using this eligibility, I would say, than the normal number of transfers. So it should be pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting, especially with the fact that especially here at Avery, you have a lot of super seniors. So, you have a lot of people that's able to they're able to come back and replay their season, obviously that they're lost. But as far as like the transfers, I agree with the point that it's going to be a lot more competition. When you have people staying for 5 years instead of 4 due to that extra year, and somebody else is trying to transfer in, colleges are going to start, denying, in my opinion. I feel like it's going to be a lot less transfers within the next few years. But at the end of the day, I really am shocked with the fact that there's a lot of super seniors. Let me just say it like that, especially at Avery University.
Thank you. And that also puts the administration in a little bit of a pickle when it comes to financial aid and scholarships and how do we handle those types of situations. I have another question for you. Give you a second to think about it. What would you change about college athletics if you could? So if you could change something about college athletics, what would it be? Natalie, I'll let you start with that one.
Thanks, Dr. Dabbs. Well, I think I was kind of talking about this earlier with the other panelists, but I really think there is a huge opportunity to provide even more mental health support for student athletes. I think when things, just for example, in our own athletic department, I know that certain students have been struggling or just I've heard stories around the country of student athletes whose teammates have noticed something and then they went to their trainer and then nothing happened after that. Or there's all types of mental health struggles and challenges as well. And I just feel like there are way more challenges going on than there are people to help address those problems and challenges. And if I could change one thing, I would just really want to see more people advocating for mental health and telling those football players it's okay if you're not tough all the time, like you're still a human being, and giving them real life ways to navigate these issues and not just sweep it under the rug.
Chris, what about you?
I would have to go with transparency. I feel like at times there's a lot of cloudiness from like different administrations, whether it's the NCAA or a specific school administration on why decisions are being made. And so I think that college athletics should empower the student athlete because at the end of the day, there's no sport without the student athlete. And so I think that by giving the student athlete more power and giving them more decision-making ability, you open yourself up to more transparency and allowing people to see what's really going on behind the scenes.
Devin?
I love the idea of giving the student athlete a little more power. At my school, it's kind of hard to have that conversation due to, I guess you could say, I mean, I go to a D3 university, a small school, so it's there's a lack of a budget. But as far as like a larger university, I feel like some student athletes should be given, I mean, I hate to say it this way, but they should be given a little bit more incentive or a little more, I guess, pay to do what they do. A lot of student athletes, they are the reasoning why the school is excelling in the way that they are. And I feel like some of them should be recognized in that way. As far as especially the larger Division I schools, you have a lot of players that are just honestly, they represent the entire school and sometimes they're not taken care of. So I just believe the student athletes should be empowered a little bit more. So I agree with Chris for sure.
Emma, you're up.
I completely agree with Natalie. I think that each athletic department should have a sports psychologist there at all times. Not just like one that I can really be in contact with. I want one like I hope that I wish that there's like one in the building, just even to quick check in. So I think like mental health is one thing that could change. I think that we're seeing a change in it, but I wish it just happened a little bit earlier. And I just hope that it's changing at each school. And yeah, I just think mental health should be like more important in a student athlete's life.
And Devin, you mentioned something that, you each attend different universities at different levels, at different sports. And I just, want to open it up to the group for the last, 2 or 3 minutes here before we close out the symposium. There's a reason that when you talk about perspectives in student athletes, while we feel like it's important to have the student athlete's perspective. And so I guess from your own perspective, your own lens at your own institution, your own journey, your own story, what do you think the attendees should take away knowing about the student athlete experience? I was a student athlete, so I understand a little bit of what you all have gone through and are going through, even though that was just only a few years ago. But in 2021, through your lens, what is one takeaway you would like for us all to leave here with from your own words, from your own perspective?
From my perspective, I believe it should be about serving others in life. From being a student athlete, you kind of learn that, you play the sport because of your love for it and you want shine and I guess you want glory and everything. But at the end of the day, you start learning that it's really about how can you help the person to the next, next to you, to the right of you or to the left of you. And, from my lens at Avery University, I had to buy into the fact that, we don't have scholarships. So we're not getting paid to go to school. We are paying to play. We chose to pay to play. So, our love for the game had to be, unimaginable. But it's a situation where, within that love for the game, you realize that, wow, this is not about me. So it's a bigger picture. It's about serving others and trying to inspire others as well. So from my lens, I'll definitely say, just being able to pick up your fellow man or woman to the right or left of you, and making sure that you're grinding and you're passionate about your work every day because it's not about you. It's about how you can help somebody else.
Emma?
I think that when I play, I'm not just playing for me, I'm playing for like the whole school. Like I have Wofford across my chest. When I play, I'm not just playing like for Wofford women's lacrosse team, I'm playing for the whole school. So I think one thing that I hope the attendees like take away is just like support and like always like motivate your student athletes because they represent the whole student body, everyone on the field. So it's bigger than just like playing for the love of the sport. It's playing for your school and playing for everyone involved in it.
Thank you. Natalie.
Yeah, just from a student athlete, I hear a lot. People always say, oh, student athletes, they get extra benefits and all this. And in response to that, I would say that with great rights comes great responsibility. People can see it as, oh, that student athlete missed every Friday in the fall semester. Well, what do you think they were doing? They were probably on a bus traveling, still probably somehow keeping up with the class, already did their homework like 3 days before it was even due because we knew we were going to not have Wi-Fi that evening. It's not glamorous. There are definitely really great parts to being a student athlete that I'm so grateful for. And I wouldn't trade it for anything, but I do really think that unless you have been a student athlete, you should really consider what you're saying when you say that we get more than the next person just because we're an athlete. But yeah, I'm still very grateful for it, and I would take those responsibilities with those rights any day. So I'm just really grateful for the opportunity, and I would recommend it to anybody who's down for it.
Thank you, Natalie. And Chris, what about you?
Yeah, I think that, like everyone else has said, there's great values that are taught through sports, and there's a great responsibility, whether that's representing yourself or the university. And so I think that the biggest takeaway from sports is that we all play it because we love the game. We understand that there are possible benefits out there, or you will learn personal values. But I think at the end of the day, the only reason you're in it is because you have to love the game to put yourself through the things that you put yourself through. And so I think that it's important for everyone to recognize that these people love this activity, and let's support them because they love it so much that they're willing to do it in front of all of us.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. What an amazing afternoon. I'm going to put myself on video now as we close. So thank you, Emma, Devin, Chris, and Natalie for your perspectives on college athletics from the student athlete view. So I'm going to take an opportunity to represent the Elon Sport Management Department, and I'm going to thank you all for joining us for our annual symposium. This was the first virtual one that we've done. Thank you, COVID, for that. But I will say that this symposium has been such a great experience learning different perspectives on name, image, and likeness, the gender gap, student athlete perspectives, and that wonderful one-on-one with Oliver Luck. So I want to thank the department. I want to thank the event class who planned and executed this event, the panelists, the moderators, technology, communications. Thank you all so much for making this a wonderful evening. I know I learned a lot, and I love college athletics. And so hopefully we can have some deeper discussion and dialogue across professions, across campuses, so where we can think a little bit deeper and act a little bit stronger in terms of college athletics. There will be a recording of the symposium. It will be posted on the symposium website. So be on a look for that in case you want to share it or watch any parts you might have missed. Thank you again from the Elon University Sport Management Department, and have a great evening.